My parents handed my younger sister a $2 million check to start her dream business, then turned around and told me to pack my bags because I was just wasting space in their mansion. I cut them out of my life and never looked back. 5 years later, her business collapsed and she had to move back home. But when she tried to break onto the private beach of an $8 million villa for Instagram pictures, she had no idea she was trespassing on my property. Before I get into how I made them regret every word they ever said to me, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to prove your toxic family wrong. The South Carolina sun was beating down on the pristine white sand of Hilton Head, but the iced caramel macchiato in my hand was perfectly chilled. I stood on the second-story balcony of my newly constructed ultra-modern beachfront villa, enjoying the ocean breeze. The house was a masterpiece of sleek glass walls, teak wood decking, and an infinity pool that seemed to spill directly into the Atlantic. I was 33 years old, the founder of a luxury real estate development firm, and I had built this $8 million sanctuary from the ground up. It was supposed to be a quiet Tuesday afternoon to celebrate closing a massive commercial deal back in Atlanta. Instead, I found myself looking down at my private dunes watching my security team deal with two very loud, very familiar trespassers. Even from 50 feet away in the air, I recognized the frantic posing and the high-pitched, demanding voice. It was my younger sister, Imani. She was wearing a cheap, brightly colored resort dress that screamed fast fashion, desperately trying to capture the perfect luxury lifestyle aesthetic for her social media followers. Beside her stood her husband, Connor, a man who practically sweated trust fund entitlement. He was wearing pastel shorts and boat shoes, currently shoving his finger into the chest of my head security guard, Derek. I leaned against the glass railing and took a slow sip of my coffee, watching the pathetic display unfold. Connor was shouting about public beach access laws and threatening to call his lawyers, while Imani ignored the confrontation entirely, twisting her body into unnatural angles, trying to get the sweeping glass architecture of my villa in the background of her selfies. The sheer irony of the situation was almost too sweet to bear. 5 years ago, my parents, Desmond and Vivian, had proudly handed Imani and Connor $2 million in cash to open a luxury holistic wellness spa in Buckhead. On that exact same night, my mother looked at me studying for my real estate broker exams at the kitchen table after working a double shift and told me I was an embarrassment to their high society image. She told me I was just wasting space in their mansion and ordered me to leave so Imani and Connor could have the entire top floor to plan their empire. Now here they were trying to steal the backdrop of my actual empire just to maintain the illusion that they were still wealthy. I knew through my industry contacts in Atlanta that Imani's spa had gone spectacularly bankrupt 6 months ago, and Connor had been quietly let go from his father's investment firm. They were broke, living back in my parents' basement, but still desperately trying to keep up appearances for the Atlanta elite. I watched Derek hold his ground politely, but firmly, instructing Connor to step back over the property line. Connor grew red in the face, puffing out his chest and attempting to physically push past the guard. That was enough entertainment for one morning. It was time to put an end to the trespassing. I turned away from the balcony and walked down the floating glass staircase that led to the ground floor. The cool marble beneath my bare feet felt grounding as I approached the massive oak front doors. I swung the door open and stepped out onto the teak decking, the sound of the crashing waves competing with Connor's escalating tantrum. "Do you have any idea who my family is?" Connor was yelling at Derek, his voice carrying clearly over the ocean breeze. "We belong in these neighborhoods. You are just a rent-a-cop. Move out of the way before I ruin your life." Derek did not flinch, but he did look over Connor's shoulder and saw me approaching. He gave a slight nod of relief. "Ms. Zuri," he said, his voice calm and professional. "These individuals refuse to vacate the private dunes. They claim they have a legal right to photograph the property." At the sound of my name, Imani froze mid-pose. She slowly lowered her phone and turned around. The color completely drained from her face, leaving her looking pale and terrified. Connor stopped mid-rant and spun around, his mouth falling open as he took in the sight of me standing there in a silk lounge set holding my coffee cup on the deck of the most expensive property on the shoreline. Zuri Imani whispered, her eyes darting frantically from my face to the sprawling glass mansion behind me. "What are you doing here?" I took a leisurely step forward, the warm sand crunching slightly over the edge of the wood deck. "You are trespassing on private property, Imani," I said, keeping my voice perfectly even and completely devoid of any sisterly warmth. "And honestly, that dress is entirely too flammable to be out in this heat. You should step back before you melt." Imani blinked rapidly, her brain clearly struggling to process the visual information in front of her. She looked at the security guard, then back at me, her face contorting into a mask of denial. "You work here?" she asked, a harsh, desperate laugh escaping her throat. "Oh my God, you are a property manager for this place. Tell your boss to tell this guard to let me take my pictures, Zuri. I have brand deals to maintain." Connor quickly caught on to her delusion, regaining his arrogant posture. "Yeah, Zuri, tell your boss to call off the guard. We are just getting some content. It is not a big deal. You can go back to cleaning the pool, or whatever it is they pay you to do." I looked at Connor, the man who had sat at my parents' dining table 5 years ago and laughed when my father called me a failure. I took another step forward, closing the distance until I was looking directly into his pale blue eyes. "I am not the property manager, Connor," I said, my voice dropping to a sharp, commanding register. "I am the boss. I own this villa. I own the land you are standing on. I own the private beach stretching 50 yards in every direction. This is my $8 million home, and you are currently trespassing on my dunes." The silence that followed was absolute. The only sound was the rhythmic crashing of the waves against the shore. Imani's eyes widened to the size of saucers as she stared at the massive architectural marvel behind me, taking in the infinity pool, the imported stone, and the sheer scale of the wealth on display. Her breathing hitched. The reality that the sister she had mocked, the sister she had helped kick out into the street, was now standing in front of her as a multimillionaire finally penetrated her thick skull. Her reaction was immediate and entirely unhinged. She did not apologize. She did not express surprise or offer congratulations. Instead, her face twisted into a mask of pure childish rage. She whipped out her phone, her hands shaking violently, and stabbed at the screen until she connected a video call. "Mom," she screamed into the phone the moment the call connected completely, ignoring my presence. "Mom, she is here. Zuri is here." I could hear Vivian's frantic voice echoing thinly from the phone speaker. "Imani, calm down. What is going on? Where are you?" "She owns it, Mom," Imani shrieked, stomping her foot in the sand like a toddler having a meltdown in a grocery store. "She owns the giant glass house on the private beach, the one I wanted to rent for my birthday, but we could not afford. She is standing right here in a silk robe looking at me. Why does she get everything? Why is she living like a billionaire while I had to file bankruptcy? It is not fair. It is not fair." Imani collapsed onto her knees in the sand, ruining her cheap dress, completely sobbing hysterically into the screen. I could hear my mother demanding answers through the phone, her voice rising in a panic, calling my name, demanding that I take the phone and explain myself. I felt absolutely nothing for the woman crying in the sand or the woman screaming through the speaker. They had made their choices 5 years ago, and I had made mine. I turned to Derek, my security guard. "If they step one single inch past the property line markers again," I said loudly enough for Connor and the phone to hear, "call the local police and have them arrested for trespassing. I will gladly press charges." I turned my back on them and began walking up the glass staircase toward my peaceful morning. The absolute audacity of their presence disgusted me, but the confirmation of their financial ruin brought a deep, satisfying clarity to my spirit. As I reached the top of the stairs, Connor's voice rang out behind me, shrill and desperate. "You owe us Zuri!" he yelled, his face red with rage and humiliation. "You stole family resources to buy this place. This belongs to the family. You owe us." I did not even bother turning around. I simply walked inside and let the heavy oak door close firmly behind me, shutting out their noise. I knew the peace would not last. I knew the moment Vivian processed what Imani had just shown her, the real war would begin. But as I set my coffee cup down on the marble counter, I welcomed it. They had no idea who they were dealing with anymore. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind me, sealing away the sound of Connor shouting and the crashing Atlantic waves. The sudden silence of my foyer was absolute. I walked across the imported Italian marble floors and set my coffee cup down on the kitchen island. I did not even get a chance to take a breath before the polished surface of the counter began to vibrate. My phone screen lit up. The caller ID displayed one word: Vivian. I let it ring 3 times. Let her sweat. Let her panic build. On the 4th ring, I swiped the screen and lifted the phone to my ear. I did not say hello. I did not have to. Zuri, what on earth is wrong with you? My mother's voice exploded through the speaker, shrill and frantic, completely stripped of her usual country club refinement. Your sister is having a panic attack on the beach. She said you set security guards on her and Connor. Have you lost your mind? I leaned against the cool marble counter and inspected my manicure. I did not set guards on anyone, Mother. I simply instructed my staff to remove 2 trespassers who were taking unauthorized photos on my private dunes. It is standard protocol for a property of this value. Stop talking to me like a corporate brochure, Vivian shrieked. That is your sister. She called me sobbing. Do you have any idea how much stress she is under right now? Imani and Connor have hit a rough patch and they need a place to decompress. You are going to give them the access codes to that house immediately. They can stay for the summer until things blow over. It is the least you can do for your family. A rough patch. The audacity of the phrasing almost made me laugh. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked out. Down on the sand, Connor was still arguing with my security team while Imani wiped mascara off her cheeks. A rough patch. I repeated, my voice dropping to a low, dangerously calm register. Is that what we are calling a total bankruptcy now? Is that what we call Connor driving Imani's luxury holistic wellness spa straight into the ground and losing his job at his daddy's firm? How do you know about that? Vivian snapped, her tone instantly defensive. I build commercial real estate in Atlanta, Mom. Everyone knows. The banks talk, the developers talk. You cannot hide a massive default in our circles no matter how many charity galas you host. Vivian huffed loudly into the receiver. That is exactly why they need to get out of the city. The gossip is malicious. They need a sanctuary. You have an enormous house sitting right on the beach, Zuri. You are a single woman. You do not need 8,000 square feet to yourself. Let them use it. You owe this family your loyalty. I owe this family absolutely nothing. The words came out sharper than I intended, slicing through the air like a blade. I pushed away from the glass window, the memories of 5 years ago rushing back with sudden, violent clarity. Let us take a trip down memory lane, Vivian, I said, pacing across the expansive living room. Let us go back exactly 5 years. Do you remember that night? Because I do. I remember sitting at the kitchen table in your massive Buckhead mansion at 2 in the morning. I had just finished my 3rd shift of the week at the leasing office, and I was studying for my broker exams. My eyes were practically bleeding from exhaustion. Zuri, do not start this. Vivian tried to interrupt, but I spoke over her, my voice rising with years of suppressed anger. No, you are going to listen. I remember you and Dad walking into the kitchen with Imani and Connor. I remember Dad pulling out his checkbook with that smug, self-satisfied smile on his face. He wrote a check for $2 million. $2 million in cash handed right to Connor to start Imani's little dream business. A business she had 0 qualifications to run. They presented a solid business plan. Vivian fired back, her voice tight. We made an investment in our daughter's future. You made an investment in a delusion, I corrected her. But that was not the worst part, was it? The worst part was what you did next. You turned to me, your oldest daughter, the one working 3 jobs, fighting tooth and nail just to get a foot in the door of the real estate world. You looked at my textbook spread across your pristine granite counter and you told me to pack my bags. I was just giving you tough love, Vivian said, reciting the exact same lie she had told herself for half a decade. You needed to learn independence. You told me I was an embarrassment. I stated the memory cold and hard in my chest. You said my struggling made the family look bad in front of your elite friends. You looked me dead in the eyes and said, "You are just wasting space here, Zuri. We need the entire top floor for Imani and Connor to plan their corporate strategy. You need to leave by morning." The line went silent for a few seconds. The weight of her own cruelty hung in the air between us. I had lived out of my Honda Civic for 3 weeks after that night. I showered at a cheap gym and studied in 24-hour diners until I passed my exams and closed my first commercial deal. I built my development firm from the street up, navigating a ruthless male-dominated industry without a single dime of Atlanta money. And now I continued, my voice steady and triumphant. The golden child blew through your $2 million. Her corporate strategy turned out to be a complete failure, and the daughter who was wasting space just built a cash-paid architectural masterpiece on the most exclusive coastline in South Carolina. So, no, Mom. Imani and Connor are not getting my access codes. They are not spending the summer sipping margaritas on my teak deck. They can go back to your basement and figure out their own lives. Vivian gasped. I could hear her breathing heavily, the sound of a matriarch realizing she had completely lost control of her scapegoat. When she finally spoke again, the frantic, demanding tone was completely gone. In its place was something dark, cold, and menacing. It was the voice she used when she was destroying someone at a board meeting. You listen to me very carefully, Zuri. Vivian said, her words measured and sharp. You might have scraped together some money. You might have built a nice little beach house. But you are still a novice playing in a world you do not understand. You do not mess with Atlanta money, and you certainly do not disrespect your father. I am not afraid of Desmond, I replied, standing tall in the center of my flawless living room. You should be, Vivian shot back. You build houses in his state, Zuri. You rely on the zoning boards, the permits, the city planners. You forget who your father plays golf with every Sunday. You forget whose campaigns we fund. If you do not call security right now and let your sister into that house, Desmond will make one phone call. He will have your contractor licenses revoked by Tuesday. He will freeze your projects, bleed your company dry, and break your little firm before the end of the week. The threat was explicit. It was not just a mother defending her favorite child anymore. This was a declaration of war. Vivian was threatening to destroy my entire livelihood just to save face and protect Imani from the consequences of her own financial ruin. I walked back to the kitchen island, picked up my coffee, and took a slow, deliberate sip. The caffeine tasted rich and bold. Tell Dad to make his phone call, I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. Tell him to bring everything he has, because I am not the scared girl studying at your kitchen table anymore. I am the woman who owns the table now, and if he tries to touch my company, I will expose exactly how broke you both really are. I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the marble counter. The screen went dark, but my mind was entirely illuminated. The opening shot had been fired. My parents thought they could still dictate my life through threats and political connections. They thought their country club influence was absolute. They had no idea that I had spent the last 5 years not just building houses, but building a fortress of leverage. I looked out the window one last time. Imani and Connor were finally trudging away from my dunes, their shoulders slumped in defeat, heading back to whatever cheap motel they had rented. They were the least of my problems now. The real battle was waiting for me back in Georgia. I needed to pack a bag and head straight to my corporate headquarters. It was time to show Desmond and Vivian exactly what happens when you wage war against the daughter you threw away. My corporate headquarters occupied the entire penthouse floor of a glass high-rise in Midtown. I designed the space myself to reflect exactly what my firm stood for: clean lines, floor-to-ceiling windows, and absolute transparency. The hum of productivity was usually the only sound echoing across the polished concrete floors. My team of 30 architects, project managers, and brokers operated like a well-oiled machine. Until exactly 10:15 on Tuesday morning, I was in the middle of reviewing the zoning blueprints for our latest commercial acquisition when the silent alarm under my desk flashed red. It was the panic button connected directly to my front reception desk. My heart hammered against my ribs. I dropped my pen and strode out of my office, expecting to see a disgruntled contractor or a confused delivery driver. Instead, I saw my parents, Desmond and Vivian were standing in the center of my immaculate lobby, treating my lead receptionist like she was dirt beneath their custom leather shoes. My father wore his signature tailored navy suit, the one he wore to his exclusive country club board meetings. My mother stood beside him, clutching a designer handbag, her face twisted in that familiar mask of aristocratic impatience. "I do not care if she is in a meeting." Desmond was barking at the young receptionist leaning over the curved marble desk to physically intimidate her. "You are going to pick up that phone and tell Zuri her father is here. I do not wait in lobbies." I stepped out into the open floor plan. My entire staff had stopped working. Dozens of eyes were darting between the commotion at the front desk and me. "Step away from my staff, Dad," I said. My voice carried clearly across the room, slicing through the tense silence. Desmond whipped around. He looked me up and down, taking in my tailored slate gray suit and the undeniable authority I held in this space. He tried to mask his surprise with immediate anger. "There you are," he snapped, adjusting his cuffs. "Your girl here was trying to tell us we needed an appointment to see our own daughter. You need to train your people better, Zuri. We have family business to discuss, right now." Vivian crossed her arms. "We are not leaving until we get this sorted out, Zuri. The stunt you pulled with your sister on Sunday was entirely unacceptable." I could see my project managers exchanging wide-eyed glances. The last thing I needed was the toxic rot of my family spilling out in front of the team I had spent 5 years building. I walked past them toward the massive glass-walled conference room at the center of the office. "Get inside," I ordered without looking back. For a second, I thought Desmond might refuse just to prove a point, but the sheer number of people watching forced his hand. He and Vivian followed me into the soundproof room. I shut the heavy glass door behind us, cutting off the ambient noise of the office. We were completely visible to everyone on the floor, but our words belonged only to us. Desmond immediately walked to the head of the long mahogany table and pulled out the executive chair, preparing to sit. "Do not sit there," I said sharply. He froze halfway down. "Excuse me. That is my chair, Dad. You are a guest in my building. Sit on the side." His jaw tightened so hard I thought his teeth might crack. He glared at me for a long, heavy moment before sliding into a side chair. Vivian sat next to him, placing her bag on the table like she owned the place. I remained standing at the head of the table, looking down at the two people who had once been my entire world. "You have exactly 5 minutes before I call building security," I said. "What do you want?" Desmond cleared his throat, leaning forward and clasping his hands together in a practiced business pose. "Let us drop the hostility, Zuri. We are a family. Families have disagreements, but when push comes to shove, we take care of our own. Your mother and I are here to give you an opportunity to step up." "An opportunity," I repeated flatly. Vivian jumped in. "Your sister is going through a transitional period. That wellness spa she opened was ahead of its time. The market just was not ready for her visionary approach. It was a minor setback." "It was a $2 million bankruptcy, Mom," I corrected her. "She blew through your cash and defaulted on her commercial lease. That is not a transition. That is a total failure." Desmond slammed his hand flat against the mahogany table. "You will not speak about your sister that way. Imani is dealing with a lot right now, and Connor has recently separated from his father's investment firm. They are looking to restructure their lives." "Separated?" I laughed out loud. "You mean Connor got fired by his own dad? That takes a special kind of incompetence." Desmond ignored the jab, his face flushing deep red. "Connor is a brilliant man with an incredible pedigree. His family lineage in this city is impeccable. He just needs the right platform to showcase his executive skills. That is where you come in, Zuri. We have decided that you are going to bring Connor on board here at your firm." I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. When none came, I shook my head. "You want me to hire Connor?" "Yes," Desmond said, his tone shifting into an absolute command. "You will bring him on as a vice president of development. He has the connections to take this little firm of yours to the next level. You need a strong male presence at the executive level anyway. And while Connor gets settled into his new role, you are going to hand over the keys to that Hilton Head property." Imani needs the ocean air to recover from the stress of the last few months. You will do this to uphold the family name. The sheer audacity of the demand hung in the air. I looked from Desmond to Vivian. They were completely serious. They had marched into the multi-million-dollar company I built from nothing and demanded I hand over a corner office to the man who laughed when I was thrown into the street. They expected me to surrender my personal sanctuary to the sister who tried to break into it for Instagram clout. I looked at my father and I started to laugh. It was not a chuckle. It was a deep, genuine laugh that echoed off the soundproof glass walls. I laughed so hard my eyes watered. Vivian looked appalled. Desmond looked furious. "You think this is funny, Zuri?" Desmond growled, his voice vibrating with rage. "I think you are both completely delusional," I said, wiping a tear from the corner of my eye. "You kicked me out of your house 5 years ago because I was wasting space. You threw all your money at a golden child who flushed it down the drain. And now that your golden child and her useless husband have bled you dry, you march into my kingdom and demand I put them on my payroll. It is your duty to this family," Vivian shrieked, standing up from her chair. "We raised you. We put a roof over your head for 20 years. And then you took it away." The second I became an inconvenience, I shot back, leaning over the table, so I was eye level with her. Connor does not know the first thing about real estate development. He could not zone a doghouse, let alone manage a commercial portfolio. I would not hire him to sweep these floors. And Imani will never set foot inside my beach house. You can take your family name and your pedigree and march right back out the way you came. Desmond stood up slowly. His tall frame still cast an imposing shadow, but I did not flinch. He walked around the side of the table until he was standing just inches away from me. The veins in his neck were bulging. The polished country club facade had completely melted away, leaving only a ruthless, desperate man. "You listen to me, you arrogant little girl," Desmond said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Family loyalty is not optional. You think because you have your name on the door you hold the cards. You forget who I am. You forget the circles I move in." I looked him dead in the eye. "I know exactly who you are, Dad." Desmond slammed his fist so hard onto the table that the glass walls rattled. Everyone outside the room jumped. "You are currently bidding on the Midtown Eco-Complex, Zuri," Desmond snarled, stepping even closer. $50 million, your biggest project to date. You need city council approval. You need zoning variances. You need environmental waivers. Who do you think sits on those boards? Who do you think they play golf with every weekend? A cold chill washed over my skin. He had done his research. He knew exactly where I was vulnerable. "If you do not hire Connor and give your sister that house by the end of business today, I will personally make sure your permits are frozen." Desmond threatened, his eyes wide and manic. "I will call in every favor I have in this city. I will tie your firm up in red tape until you bleed out every last dime you have saved. I will destroy your company before they even pour the concrete." He backed away, straightening his tie. "You have until 5 o'clock, Zuri. Uphold the family name, or I will ensure you do not have a name left in this town. Let us go, Vivian." He turned and marched out of the conference room, Vivian right on his heels. I stood there alone in the glass box, watching them disappear into the elevator. My hands were shaking slightly, but not from fear. Desmond had just shown his hand. He had promised to destroy my biggest project to protect Connor and Imani. But what my father did not understand was that I had built my empire by surviving his cruelty. If he wanted a war in the trenches of Atlanta real estate, he had just picked a fight with the wrong developer. Desmond turned toward the glass door, his hand reaching for the stainless steel handle, fully expecting me to crumble under the weight of his ultimatum. He thought 5 o'clock was a generous deadline for my surrender. "Before you leave, I suggest you look at exactly what your family name bought you," I said. My voice was steady without a single tremor. I reached down to the lower shelf of the mahogany table and pulled out a thick, leather-bound folder. I let it drop onto the glass surface. The heavy thud echoed in the soundproof room, causing both of my parents to stop in their tracks. Vivian turned around, her perfectly arched eyebrows pulling together in suspicion. "What is that?" Desmond demanded, his hand still resting on the door handle. "These are your returns on investment," I replied, sliding the folder across the smooth table until it stopped right in front of him. "You walked into my office demanding that I fix a $2 million mistake. As a developer, I never take on a distressed asset without running a full financial audit. Open it, Dad. Or are you afraid of what your country club friends might hear if I read it out loud?" Desmond scoffed, but he let go of the door. He stalked back to the table and flipped the leather cover open. Vivian crowded in right next to him, leaning over his shoulder to look at the paperwork. The first page was a copy of the commercial lease agreement for Imani's luxury holistic wellness spa in Buckhead. I had highlighted the termination clause in bright yellow. "You gave them $2 million to build a wellness empire," I said, walking slowly around the edge of the table. "But they broke the commercial lease on that prime Buckhead real estate after exactly 3 months. They did not even finish the interior build-out. So where did the rest of the cash go?" "Turn the page, Dad. Let us look at Connor's brilliant executive strategy." Desmond flipped the heavy parchment paper. His eyes darted across the printed bank records and LLC transfer documents my financial team had spent the last 48 hours legally digging up. 2 matching Porsche Panameras. I announced, my voice ringing with absolute clarity. "Purchased entirely in cash under the spa's business account just 2 weeks after you handed them that giant novelty check." Connor claimed they were promotional vehicles. "Tell me, Vivian, how exactly does a bright yellow sports car promote holistic healing and organic face masks?" Vivian swallowed hard, her manicured fingers gripping the edge of the table. "You have to spend money to make money in the luxury wellness space, Zuri. They needed to project an image of success to attract high-end clientele. It was a marketing expense." "A marketing expense," I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that cut right through her pathetic defense. "You want to talk about marketing expenses? Turn to page 4, Desmond. Keep reading." My father flipped another page, and I watched the color drain from his face. The rigid posture he had maintained since storming into my lobby suddenly cracked. "That is a detailed itinerary of their first-class flights to Dubai," I said, crossing my arms. $50,000 on Emirates Air. Another $80,000 on a luxury villa rental on the Palm Jumeirah. They spent $20,000 on champagne service alone at a beach club. They coded it as a corporate networking retreat to source organic essential oils. I have the customs declarations right there on the next page. They did not bring back a single drop of oil. They brought back designer handbags and Rolex watches. Desmond slammed the folder shut, his chest heaving. "Where did you get this? These are private financial records. When a business files for massive commercial bankruptcy, the filings become a matter of public record," I explained, keeping my gaze locked on his. "You just have to know where to look. And I know exactly where to look, because I actually do the work. I did not just wake up and inherit this company. I built it while you were funding their vacations." "You are twisting this," Vivian stammered, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Your sister trusted Connor to handle the accounting. She is an artist, a visionary. She did not know he was mismanaging the operational funds. She is a victim in this. She is a parasite," I shot back, my voice finally rising to meet her volume. "And you are her host. You want to know what I was doing while your visionary daughter was sipping imported champagne in Dubai on your dime. Let me refresh your memory, since you both seem to have such severe amnesia." I stepped right up to Vivian, forcing her to look me in the eye. "5 years ago, on the exact same night, you handed them that $2 million check. You threw me out into the street. You told me I was wasting space because I was studying for my broker exams instead of finding a rich husband. You told me my ambition was an embarrassment to your social circle. Do you know how cold it gets in a compact Honda Civic in late November, Mom? Do you know what it feels like to wake up with frost on the inside of your windshield while trying to memorize commercial zoning laws before your morning shift at a coffee shop?" Vivian looked away, unable to hold my stare, but I refused to let her off the hook. "I showered at a $20 a month gym." I continued, the raw truth of those years spilling out of me. "I ate discounted bagels that my manager let me take home at closing time. I worked 3 jobs to pay for my real estate license, while you two funded a criminal lifestyle for a man who has never worked an honest day in his life. I clawed my way out of that car. I sold starter homes to first-time buyers until I could afford to invest in commercial lots. I took every rejection, every closed door, every single ounce of your disgust, and I used it to build a $50 million development firm. Desmond scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. You think you are the only person who ever struggled. You want a medal for doing your job. No, Dad. I want you to understand your place, I said, my tone dropping back to a lethal calm. You walked in here demanding that I hire a fraud. You demanded I give my hard-earned beach house to a woman who blew through $2 million of your money. You threatened to destroy my eco-complex if I did not comply. But you have absolutely zero leverage. You backed a losing horse, and now you want me to pay the vet bill. It is not going to happen. I reached over to the sleek silver intercom sitting in the center of the conference table and pressed the main button. Derek, I said, speaking clearly into the microphone. Please send a security detail to the glass conference room. We have 2 guests who have overstayed their welcome. You cannot do this, Desmond roared, taking a threatening step toward me. I am your father. I will not be thrown out of a building by some rented muscle. You threw me out of my own home, I reminded him without a shred of sympathy. Consider this returning the favor. The heavy glass door swung open. Derek and 2 other large men in sharp black suits stepped into the room. They did not say a word, but their presence immediately sucked the remaining air out of the space. Desmond and Vivian looked at the guards, and then back at me, pure venom radiating from their eyes. You are formally banned from this building, I said, turning my back to them and gathering my files. You are banned from my corporate properties and my private residences. If you ever show up uninvited to my office or my home again, I will have you arrested for trespassing. And unlike you, I do not make empty threats. Vivian grabbed her designer bag, her hands trembling with a mixture of rage and humiliation. You are dead to us, Zuri. You hear me. You are no daughter of mine. I am finally fine with that, Vivian, I replied, not looking up from my documents. Derek stepped aside, gesturing toward the hallway. Sir, ma'am, it is time to leave. Desmond snatched the leather folder off the table, refusing to look at me as he stormed out of the conference room. Vivian followed him, her head held artificially high as she marched past my staff. Dozens of my employees were watching the entire spectacle unfold in absolute silence. I stood in the glass box and watched them walk toward the main lobby elevators. Desmond was walking fast, his face a mask of concentrated fury. As they reached the lobby doors, I saw him pull his smartphone from his inner jacket pocket. He did not even wait to get down to the street level. I watched through this glass as he dialed a number and pressed the phone aggressively to his ear. He paced back and forth in front of the elevator banks, ignoring the security guards watching him. I could not hear his voice through the soundproof walls of my office, but I did not need to. I knew exactly who he was calling. Desmond pointed a finger at the floor as the elevator doors chimed open. He barked an order into the phone, his face red with vindictive triumph, before stepping into the elevator car. Pull the permits on the downtown eco-complex, he was saying to the zoning commissioner on the other end of the line. Yes, the $50 million project. Pull them right now. The silver doors slid shut, cutting off his image. I took a deep breath, letting the silence of the office wash over me. Desmond thought he had just delivered a fatal blow to my company. He thought his country club connections would bring me crawling back to his doorstep, begging for mercy. He was about to find out that while he was busy playing golf with local politicians, I had been building a network that stretched all the way to the state capitol. The war had officially begun, and I was ready to burn his false kingdom to the ground. The morning air in Atlanta was already thick with July humidity by the time my matte black SUV pulled up to the Midtown Eco-Complex site. Normally at 6 in the morning, this place was a symphony of progress. I should have heard the roar of diesel engines, the sharp metallic clanking of scaffolding being erected, and the shouts of 300 union contractors bringing my $50 million vision to life. This project was my masterpiece. It was a massive mixed-use development designed to be completely carbon neutral, featuring vertical gardens and state-of-the-art solar integration. It was the project that would solidify my firm as the premier commercial developer in the Southeast. Instead, the site was dead. The towering yellow cranes sat completely idle against the gray morning sky. The cement mixers were parked in silent rows, and standing outside the chained perimeter fence were hundreds of my workers holding their hard hats and murmuring among themselves. I slammed the SUV into park and stepped out onto the cracked asphalt. The heavy steel toes of my boots clicked against the ground as I walked toward the main gate. My lead foreman, Marcus, was pacing back and forth in front of the chained entrance. He was a massive man with 30 years of construction experience, but right now he looked like he had seen a ghost. "Marcus," I said, keeping my voice loud and steady to project authority over the restless crowd of contractors. "Why are my gates locked? Why are my crews standing on the sidewalk?" Marcus stopped pacing and ran a calloused hand over his face. He pointed toward the center of the chain-link gate. I followed his gaze and felt all the blood drain from my face. Zip-tied directly to the metal mesh was a massive, bright red notice. The bold black letters screamed, "Stop Work Order." It bore the official seal of the Atlanta City Zoning and Planning Commission. "They showed up at 5 in the morning, Zuri," Marcus said, his voice tight with frustration. 3 city inspectors and a police escort. They ordered my advance team off the site, locked the gates, and slapped that notice on the fence. They said if anyone steps foot inside the perimeter, they will be arrested for criminal trespassing. I walked up to the fence and stared at the red sign. The sheer visual violence of it made my jaw clench. Desmond had actually done it. Less than 24 hours after I kicked him out of my corporate office, my father had made good on his threat. He had weaponized his country club connections to bring my $50 million development to a grinding halt. "What is the daily burn rate on this delay?" I asked, without taking my eyes off the notice. Marcus pulled a clipboard from under his arm. "We are bleeding cash, Zuri. Between the idle heavy equipment rentals, the union labor penalties, the supply chain delays, and the interest on the commercial construction loan, we are losing $100,000 a day. If this order stays up for a week, we will blow past our contingency budget. If it stays up for a month, the bank will pull our financing and the whole project goes into default. $100,000 a day." Desmond was attempting to financially suffocate me. He was betting that the sheer panic of bankruptcy would force me to surrender, to hand over my Hilton Head villa to Imani, and to hire Connor as a vice president. He thought I would cave under the pressure. He thought I would prioritize my bank account over my self-respect. "Send the crews home for the day," I instructed Marcus, turning away from the gate. "Pay them for a full shift. I will not have my workers punished because of a bureaucratic hit job." "What do I tell the subcontractors?" Marcus asked, looking at the restless crowd. "Tell them we resume work on Friday," I replied, my voice completely devoid of panic. "I am going to gut whoever signed that piece of paper." I got back into my SUV and dialed my attorney. Elias Thorne was not the kind of lawyer you hired to draft contracts or negotiate polite settlements. Elias was the kind of lawyer you hired when you needed to go to war. He was a high-powered, ruthless corporate litigator who operated out of a sleek corner office in Buckhead. He charged $1,000 an hour, and he was worth every single penny. "I am already looking at it," Elias said the moment he answered the phone. "I am 10 minutes away," I replied and ended the call. When I walked into his expansive office, Elias was standing behind his glass desk, reviewing a stack of freshly printed documents. He wore a razor-sharp navy suit and an expression of pure, calculating intensity. He did not offer a polite greeting. We did not have time for pleasantries. "I pulled the public filing an hour ago," Elias said, gesturing for me to sit. "It is a complete fabrication, Zuri." I dropped my bag onto the leather chair, but remained standing, pacing the length of his Persian rug. "Tell me exactly what they are claiming." Elias picked up a document and read from it. The stop work order was issued citing severe and immediate environmental hazard violations. Specifically, they are claiming that your excavation teams struck an undocumented toxic subsoil layer and that you are illegally dumping contaminated groundwater into the city drainage system. They are demanding a full EPA review and a complete halt of all construction until a third-party environmental audit is concluded. I let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "That is physically impossible, Elias. I paid $2 million 6 months ago to have that entire city block remediated. We hired the most stringent environmental engineering firm in the state. They tested every single cubic yard of dirt on that site. We have absolute clearance from the EPA. The soil is pristine. I know, Elias said, tossing the paper onto his desk. I have the clearance certificates right here. The claims in this order are completely entirely bogus. They invented an environmental crisis out of thin air. Then how did this get approved? I demanded, placing both hands on his glass desk and leaning forward. An environmental stop work order of this magnitude requires weeks of hearings. It requires preliminary soil samples. It requires photographic evidence. You do not just wake up and shut down a $50 million commercial site on a whim. You do if you have the right signature, Elias said. He walked around the desk and stood next to me. His demeanor was chillingly calm. This was not a standard bureaucratic process, Zuri. This was a targeted execution. Someone bypassed every single standard operating procedure in the city government. They expedited this order in the middle of the night. It was pushed through with zero evidence and zero oversight. Because my father ordered it, I said, my hands balling into fists. Desmond threatened me yesterday. He told me he would pull the permits if I did not put Connor on my payroll. He used his political favors to get this done. Elias nodded. Desmond has deep pockets and he funds a lot of local campaigns. But Desmond is not a city official. He cannot sign a stop work order himself. He needed a willing executioner inside the zoning office to bypass the system. He needed someone with the authority to stamp a fraudulent document and the motive to risk their own career doing it. Do we know who signed it? I asked. Elias did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked back to his desk, picked up a thick manila folder, and slid it across the glass surface toward me. I have been digging into the zoning commission directory since your foreman called me at dawn. I looked for anyone who expedited paperwork last night. I opened the folder. Inside was a printed photograph of a middle-aged man with thinning gray hair wearing a cheap tan suit. Below his photograph was a city financial disclosure form. I scanned the document, reading the bold black print identifying the man who had unilaterally shut down my flagship development. Arthur Sterling. The name hit my brain like a physical blow. I stared at the letters, willing them to make sense. Sterling. Connor's last name was Sterling. I looked up at Elias, my heart hammering against my ribs as the realization locked into place. Is he? I started to ask. Elias nodded, his dark eyes gleaming with predatory anticipation. Arthur Sterling is the Deputy Commissioner of Commercial Zoning. He is also Connor Sterling's paternal uncle. The silence in the office was deafening. I looked back down at the photograph of the man who had just cost me $100,000 in a single morning. The pieces of the puzzle assembled themselves with terrifying clarity. Desmond was not just using a random golf buddy to teach me a lesson. He and Connor were actively coordinating to bankrupt me. Connor, the arrogant trust fund failure who had just lost his job at his own father's firm, was now weaponizing his extended family's political power to destroy my livelihood. My father and my brother-in-law were working together. They were conspiring to break my company financially so that I would have no choice but to surrender my assets to them. They thought they had me trapped. They thought a fabricated environmental violation would force me to my knees. Zuri, Elias said, his voice low and cautious. Arthur Sterling committed a felony by signing a fraudulent city order. Desmond committed extortion by threatening you beforehand. But fighting this in court could take months. The city will drag their feet on the environmental audit. You will bleed cash every single day that red sign hangs on your gate. They are trying to starve you out. What is our play? I closed the manila folder and slowly ran my hand over the smooth leather cover. The anger that had been boiling in my chest suddenly evaporated, leaving behind a cold, crystalline focus. They wanted to play dirty. They wanted to use fraud and extortion to steal my empire. Draft a lawsuit, Elias. I said, my voice dead calm. Sue the city. Sue the zoning commission. And draft a civil suit against Arthur Sterling personally for tortious interference and fraud. Elias raised an eyebrow. Filing lawsuits will not get the stop work order lifted by Friday, Zuri. We need leverage to force Sterling to rescind the order immediately. I picked up my bag and slung it over my shoulder. A slow, dangerous smile spread across my face. You draft the paperwork, Elias, I said, walking toward the heavy office door. I am going to get the leverage. Arthur Sterling wants to play family politics to protect his useless nephew. I am going to dig up every single skeleton buried in the Sterling family closet, and I am going to drag them out into the daylight. By the time I am finished, Connor's uncle is going to beg me to let my concrete trucks back onto that site. I marched out of Elias Thorne's office and practically flew down the marble corridor toward the elevators. The midday Atlanta heat hit me the second I stepped onto the pavement, but I barely registered it. I slid into the driver's seat of my SUV and threw the manila folder onto the passenger seat. I did not turn the steering wheel toward City Hall. City Hall was Desmond's playground. He had spent 30 years buying dinners, funding campaigns, and shaking hands with every local official who held a stamp of approval. If I walked into the local zoning office to contest Arthur Sterling's fraudulent order, I would be walking into a rigged game. I would be buried in appeals and bureaucratic red tape until my construction loan went into default. I refused to play by Desmond's rules. If my father wanted to use the local government to suffocate my business, I was going to drop the full weight of the state government right on his head. I merged onto the interstate and hit the speed dial on my encrypted dashboard console. The phone rang exactly twice before a smooth baritone voice answered. Zuri, it is a Tuesday afternoon. Marcus Vance said, his tone warm but strictly professional. You usually only call me when a roof is leaking or a foundation is cracking. Tell me my private sanctuary is still standing. Your off-grid solar array is operating at peak efficiency. Marcus, I replied, navigating through the heavy traffic. But I need 10 minutes of your time, in person, today. Marcus Vance was the chief of staff for the governor of Georgia. 2 years ago, he had quietly contracted my firm to design and build a highly secure, completely sustainable private estate in the Blue Ridge Mountains. He wanted a property that generated its own power and purified its own water without leaving a trace on the public grid. I delivered the project 2 months ahead of schedule and 10% under budget. I never spoke to the press about it. I never used his name in my marketing materials. I gave him absolute discretion and flawless execution. In return, he gave me his private cell phone number and a promise that if I ever needed a door opened, he would kick it down for me. I am scheduled back-to-back until 7 tonight, Zuri, Marcus said. My $50 million eco-complex in Midtown was just hit with a fraudulent stop work order, I stated, keeping my voice perfectly level. The local zoning commission is trying to extort me. They are fabricating environmental hazards to bankrupt the project. If this development dies, it takes the governor's Green Energy Initiative talking points down with it. There was a sharp exhale on the other end of the line. The warmth vanished from his voice, replaced instantly by the cold calculation of a political operator. Use the private entrance at the Capitol building, Marcus said. I will clear your name with state security. You have exactly 10 minutes. I cut the connection and pressed my foot down on the accelerator. 45 minutes later, I was sitting in a high-backed leather chair inside the wood-paneled office of the governor's chief of staff. Marcus sat across from me, his fingers steepled together, as he stared at the documents I had spread across his desk. I did not waste time with emotional backstory. I gave him the cold, hard facts. I placed the $2 million remediation certificate right in the center of his blotter. My soil is pristine, Marcus, I said, tapping the official EPA seal on the document. We spent 6 months cleaning that block before we even brought the excavators in. We have clearance from every federal agency required. But at 5 o'clock this morning, Arthur Sterling from the city zoning office bypassed standard protocol and ordered my gates locked. He cited an undocumented toxic subsoil layer. He claimed we are pumping contaminated water into the city drains. Marcus picked up the stop work order and adjusted his reading glasses. This is a local-level permit freeze. If he suspects a hazard, he has the authority to halt construction pending an audit. You have to appeal it through the municipal board, Zuri. If I appeal through the municipal board, my project bleeds $100,000 a day, I countered, leaning forward. The bank pulls my financing in 3 weeks. The project dies. And that is exactly what Arthur Sterling wants, because this has absolutely nothing to do with the environment. I slid the printed photograph of Arthur Sterling across the desk, followed by the corporate flowchart Elias had mocked up. Arthur Sterling is the uncle of Connor Sterling, I explained, holding Marcus's gaze. Connor Sterling is my brother-in-law. He recently lost his executive position at his father's investment firm. Yesterday, my father Desmond Wilson stormed into my corporate headquarters. He explicitly threatened to pull the permits on the Midtown project unless I hired Connor as a vice president at my firm and surrendered my personal real estate to my sister. I refused. Less than 24 hours later, Connor's uncle signs a bogus environmental hazard order in the dead of night. Marcus stared at the flowchart, his jaw tightening. He slowly lowered his glasses. You are telling me a local deputy commissioner is weaponizing a city agency to secure a job for his unemployed nephew. I am telling you that Desmond Wilson and Arthur Sterling are coordinating a textbook extortion scheme. I said, my voice ringing with absolute certainty. They are treating a $50 million commercial site like a family piggy bank. This eco-complex is the largest green commercial space in the state. The governor just spent 3 months touring the country, promising that Georgia is the new capital of sustainable development. How is it going to look when the press finds out a corrupt local zoning official killed your flagship green project to settle a family dispute? Marcus leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing as he processed the political liability. Desmond Wilson had money, but he was old money. He operated in the shadows of country clubs and backroom handshakes. Marcus Vance operated in the brutal daylight of state politics. He knew that if a story about local extortion killing green jobs hit the front pages, it would be a disaster. But more importantly, he saw the opportunity to assert state authority over a rogue local department. Leave the folder, Marcus said, his tone turning dangerously quiet. I am going to have the State Attorney General's office initiate an immediate ethics probe into Arthur Sterling. I will have the Department of Natural Resources review your EPA certificates. If your soil is as clean as you say it is, the state will override the local zoning mandate. I stood up and buttoned my suit jacket. Thank you, Marcus. Do not thank me yet, Zuri, he replied, picking up his desk phone. I am doing this to protect the governor's economic agenda, but if you are wrong about that dirt, I will let them bury you in it. I am not wrong, I said, and walked out of the office. The next 48 hours were an agonizing test of endurance. I kept my crews on payroll, paying them to sit at home while the financial clock ticked down. Desmond called me 4 times. I ignored every single ring. Vivian sent me a text message telling me it was not too late to apologize and do the right thing for the family. I deleted the message without responding. I refused to negotiate with terrorists. On Thursday morning, I drove back to the Midtown site. The sky was clear and the oppressive humidity had broken. I parked my SUV across the street from the chained gates and waited. Marcus, my lead foreman, was sitting on the tailgate of his pickup truck drinking coffee out of a thermos. He looked completely defeated. At exactly 8:15 in the morning, 3 black SUVs with state government plates pulled up to the curb. 4 uniformed state troopers stepped out, followed by an official from the Department of Natural Resources. They did not speak to anyone. They walked directly up to the chain-link fence. One of the troopers pulled a pair of heavy-duty wire snips from his belt. With 2 sharp snaps, he cut the thick zip ties holding the bright red stop work order to the metal mesh. The sign fell to the concrete sidewalk. The DNR official turned to my foreman. The state has reviewed the environmental certificates for this site. The local order has been officially voided due to procedural irregularities. You are cleared to resume construction immediately. My foreman stared at the official, his mouth hanging open. He looked across the street and saw me standing by my vehicle. I gave him a single sharp nod. Marcus threw his coffee cup into the back of his truck and grabbed his radio. Fire up the generators, he barked, his voice booming across the empty lot. Get the crews back on site. We are pouring concrete in 20 minutes. The roar of the diesel engines roaring back to life was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. The massive yellow cranes began to pivot in the morning sun. I stood on the sidewalk and watched my masterpiece breathe again. Desmond had taken his best shot. He had swung the heavy hammer of his political influence, and I had absolutely shattered it. The local morning news broke the story an hour later. Arthur Sterling had been placed on immediate administrative leave pending a state-level ethics investigation regarding the abuse of municipal power. Desmond's local attack dog had just been completely neutralized. My father had no leverage left. I drove back to my corporate headquarters feeling a profound sense of vindication. I rode the private elevator up to the penthouse floor and walked through my bustling office. My staff gave me subtle smiles and respectful nods. They knew what had been at stake, and they knew I had protected our firm. I stepped into my corner office and closed the door, ready to dive back into the blueprints. I had won the war, or so I thought. I had barely sat down in my leather chair when the private line on my desk began to flash. It was a direct line only 3 people possessed. I picked up the receiver, expecting to hear my architect's voice regarding the new concrete pour. "Zuri, it is Elias." My lawyer's voice was completely devoid of its usual arrogant swagger. It was tight-clipped and laced with genuine alarm. "Elias," I said, leaning back in my chair and looking out over the Atlanta skyline. "You can cancel the tortious interference suit against Arthur Sterling. The state just ripped his stop work order off my fence. He is under an ethics probe. We won." "I know about the order, Zuri," Elias said, cutting me off sharply. "That is not why I am calling. I kept digging into Connor Sterling to build the damages profile for the civil suit. You said he was fired from his father's investment firm for incompetence. You said he mismanaged Imani's business funds. He did." I replied, a cold knot forming in my stomach at the tone of his voice. "He blew $2 million on sports cars and luxury vacations." "No, Zuri, he did not." Elias said, his breathing heavy through the receiver. "I just pulled the sealed termination records from his father's firm. They buried the real reason he was let go to protect their corporate reputation. Connor did not just blow $2 million on bad marketing. He is running a massive offshore embezzlement scheme. And your sister did not just co-sign his loans." Elias paused, and I could hear him shuffling papers on his desk. "Your sister is the primary guarantor on a $10 million line of fraudulent credit." Elias continued, the words dropping like anvils in the quiet of my office. "Connor is completely bankrupt, and the people he owes money to are not banks, Zuri. They are private, unregulated lenders. Your parents did not come to your office to get him a job for his ego. They came because the people Connor stole from are actively looking for him, and your father was trying to use your company as a financial shield to hide them." The silence in Elias's office was heavy, pressing against the glass walls like a physical weight. I stared at him, letting the absolute magnitude of his words sink into my bones. Private, unregulated lenders, loan sharks. Connor was not just a trust fund brat who played too hard and failed due to sheer incompetence. He was a desperate, cornered animal in bed with very dangerous people. And my father, the great Desmond Wilson, was trying to use my $50 million commercial development firm as a human shield to protect him. Elias walked over to a secure biometric filing cabinet in the corner of his office. He pressed his thumb to the reader, pulled open the heavy steel drawer, and extracted a thick black binder. He carried it back to the glass desk and dropped it between us with a resounding thud. "When you told me to look into the spa bankruptcy to build our civil suit, I did not just look at the surface filings," Elias said, flipping the heavy cover open. "I put my best forensic accountants on it. We subpoenaed the raw ledgers. You thought Imani and Connor blew through $2 million on matching Porsches and first-class flights to Dubai. That was just the window dressing, Zuri. That was the shiny distraction to keep your sister happy and your parents completely ignorant." Elias turned the page, revealing rows of highlighted bank transfers. He tapped a manicured finger against a column of recurring payments. "Look at the vendor payouts," he instructed. I leaned forward, scanning the pristine spreadsheets. I recognized the formatting immediately. It was standard accounts payable. I saw hundreds of thousands of dollars flowing out to a handful of companies. Apex Holistic Sourcing, Zenith Wellness Logistics, Elevate Consulting Group. The payments were massive, authorized weekly, and processed without a single delay. These are standard vendor invoices I noted, tracing the lines with my eyes. Procurement for the spa, shipping, high-level consulting fees for market entry. Elias smiled, but the expression was entirely devoid of warmth. It was the smile of an apex predator looking at a wounded carcass. Look at the registered addresses for those vendors, Zuri. I looked closer. Apex Holistic Sourcing was registered to a post office box in Delaware. Zenith Wellness Logistics led back to a mail drop in a strip mall in Nevada. Elevate Consulting Group was listed at a residential address in the Cayman Islands. I ran the tax identification numbers through our proprietary databases. Elias explained, his voice low and razor sharp. None of these companies have physical corporate offices. None of them carry payroll. None of them have a digital footprint beyond a holding page. They are shell corporations. And guess whose digital signature is on the expedited incorporation documents for every single one of them? Connor. I breathed the realization, sending a shockwave of ice water through my veins. Connor, Elias confirmed. He did not just mismanage their investment. He systematically, intentionally bled them dry from day one. Every time Desmond wrote a check to keep the spa afloat, Connor was writing fake invoices to siphon the cash directly into his own offshore accounts. He billed the spa for ghost inventory. He charged exorbitant consulting fees for services that were never rendered. He used Imani as a beautiful, clueless Trojan horse to infiltrate your parents' bank accounts. He has been robbing Desmond and Vivian blind for half a decade. I leaned back in the leather chair, my mind racing to process the sheer audacity of the betrayal. Imani was vapid, deeply spoiled, and entirely obsessed with her social media presence. But she was not a criminal mastermind. She just wanted the title of Chief Executive Officer and the glamorous lifestyle that came with it. Connor had exploited her vanity perfectly. He had stolen from my parents right under their noses, all while living in their guest wing, eating food prepared by their private chef, and letting them foot the bill for his luxury lifestyle. And now that the spa was dead and the well of Atlanta money had run completely dry, Connor owed money to men who did not accept tearful apologies or corporate bankruptcy filings. I looked down at the glossy pages of bank transfers and fake invoices. I held the absolute destruction of Connor Sterling in my hands. The evidence was irrefutable. If I took this binder to the district attorney, Connor would be indicted for multiple counts of wire fraud, embezzlement, and grand larceny. He would go to federal prison for a very long time. If I took it to my father, Desmond would likely handle Connor himself, bypassing the law to tear the man apart with the full weight of his remaining influence. For a fleeting, treacherous second, a deeply buried instinct flared in my chest. It was the ghost of the daughter I used to be, the girl who wanted nothing more than to earn her place at the family table. Should I warn them? Should I drive my SUV straight to their Buckhead mansion, slam this binder onto their pristine granite kitchen island, and expose the snake they were harboring in their home? Should I save them from total financial annihilation? Then the memory hit me. It was not a gentle recollection. It was a visceral, suffocating flashback to the bitter, biting cold of a November night. I remembered the exact metallic sound the deadbolt made when Desmond locked the front door, literally shutting me out of my childhood home. I remembered the burning humiliation of walking to my rusted Honda Civic with nothing but a cheap duffel bag and a cardboard box of real estate textbooks. I remembered waking up at 4 a.m. with frost coating the inside of my windshield, my teeth chattering so hard my jaw ached. I remembered nursing a single stale cup of black coffee at a 24-hour diner just so I could use their free wireless internet to study for my broker exams. I remembered the hollow, gnawing ache of hunger in my stomach while I scrolled through social media, watching my sister post videos of herself reveling in the driver's seat of a brand new yellow Porsche. They had made their choice. They had looked at a dedicated, hard-working daughter who only wanted to build a genuine career, and they saw nothing but an embarrassment. They had looked at a parasitic, smooth-talking con artist, and they saw a son. Why should I save them from the monster they chose to feed? Package this up, Elias, I said, reaching out to close the heavy black binder. I pushed it firmly back across the glass desk. Keep the originals in your secure vault. Make digital copies on an encrypted drive. I want this financial forensics report ready to deploy at a moment's notice, but we are not going to the police yet. And we are absolutely not warning my parents. Elias arched an eyebrow, a look of profound, calculating respect crossing his sharp features. You are going to let them keep digging their own graves. I am going to let them hit the absolute bottom, I replied, standing up and smoothing out the front of my tailored suit jacket. They wanted to play corporate warfare. They wanted to shut down my eco-complex and bankrupt my firm. They are about to learn a very hard lesson about the woman they threw away. I do not just win battles, Elias. I end wars. I left his office and drove directly back to my headquarters. The energy inside my building was electric. The news of the state overriding the local zoning stop work order had spread through the departments like wildfire. My project managers were back on the phones, my architects were revising completion timelines, and my foremen were mobilizing the heavy machinery. The crisis had been averted, and my team was moving forward with a renewed fierce momentum. I had protected my house. Now it was time to plan the final offensive. I walked into my corner office and found my executive assistant, Maya, standing patiently by my desk. She held a silver tray containing a single item, and she looked slightly apprehensive. "Welcome back, Zuri," Maya said, offering a relieved smile. "The Midtown site is fully operational. We are pouring concrete on levels 3 and 4 as we speak. But a private courier dropped this off for you 20 minutes ago. They bypassed the mailroom and insisted it had to be placed directly into your hands." She pointed to the silver tray. Sitting perfectly centered on the polished metal was an oversized envelope made of thick, heavy cream-colored cardstock. The seal on the back was stamped in dark, rich gold wax. I dismissed Maya with a quick nod of thanks and sat down in my high-backed leather chair. I slid my silver letter opener under the flap and cleanly broke the gold seal. I pulled out a heavy, multi-layered invitation. The edges were gilded, and the elaborate, sweeping calligraphy shimmered under the recessed lighting of my office. It was an invitation to the annual Atlanta Elite Charity Gala. It was the absolute pinnacle of the city's social season. It was the highly exclusive night where the oldest, wealthiest, and most influential families in Georgia gathered in ball gowns and tuxedos to drink vintage champagne, bid on outrageous auction items, and pretend their lives were entirely flawless. I read the elegant text at the top of the card. My breath caught in my throat and a sharp, wicked smile broke across my face. The hosts of this year's gala, proudly inviting the city to celebrate a night of philanthropy, honor, and enduring family legacy, were none other than Desmond and Vivian Wilson. They were completely bankrupt. Their golden son-in-law was a desperate criminal laundering money and running from dangerous loan sharks. They had just failed in a spectacular, highly illegal attempt to extort their own daughter using corrupt city officials. And yet they were throwing a $1 million party to maintain the grand illusion of their supremacy. They were setting a magnificent gilded stage. They just had absolutely no idea that I was about to walk onto it and rewrite the entire script. The valet opened the door to my matte black SUV. I stepped out into the heavy, humid Atlanta night air, the silk of my emerald green gown trailing smoothly behind me. The annual Atlanta Elite Charity Gala was being held in the grand ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel. This was not just a philanthropic party. It was a battlefield cloaked in crystal chandeliers, $1,000 plates of beluga caviar, and the deafening roar of generational wealth pretending it was completely invincible. I walked up the wide marble steps, the heavy gold-foiled invitation resting securely in my clutch. My parents were hosting this extravagant lie. They were pouring vintage champagne they could no longer afford to impress people who would absolutely devour them the second the truth leaked out to the press. They were putting on the performance of a lifetime, and I held the script that could end the show. I checked my coat and stepped through the towering mahogany doors into the ballroom. The room was a blinding sea of tailored Italian tuxedos and custom designer gowns. A string quartet played classical music softly over the aggressive, relentless hum of high society networking. I accepted a flute of champagne from a passing server and took a strategic position near a towering floral arrangement of white orchids. I did not have to look hard to find the hosts. Desmond and Vivian were holding court near the absolute center of the room, exactly where they believed they belonged. My father was throwing his head back in a booming, heavily practiced laugh, clapping a state senator on the shoulder. Vivian stood perfectly at his side, draped in a diamond necklace that I knew for an absolute fact was currently leveraging a high-interest, unregulated loan. They looked like royalty. They smelled like sheer panic. A few yards away from my parents stood Imani and Connor. My sister was wearing a custom white silk dress posing for the event photographers with practiced vacuous perfection. Her lips were stretched into a brilliant smile, completely oblivious to the financial guillotine hanging directly over her neck. But Connor was a remarkably different story. The golden boy, the financial genius my parents had bet their entire family legacy on, was sweating profusely through his tailored tuxedo. His eyes darted nervously toward the ballroom entrances every time the heavy wooden doors swung open. He kept checking his phone, his thumb swiping frantically across the illuminated screen. He was looking for the men he owed $10 million to. He was waiting for the private loan sharks to bypass the valets and collect their pound of flesh on the dance floor. I turned away from this pathetic, fraudulent family portrait and began to move through the crowd. I did not need to chase down investors anymore. They came to me. Within 10 minutes, I was surrounded by a tight circle of the most powerful commercial developers, equity partners, and venture capitalists in the Southeast. 5 years ago, these exact men and women had refused to validate my parking ticket when I pitched them my initial business plans. They had looked right through me because I did not carry my father's endorsement. Tonight, they were hanging on to every single word I said about my $50 million Midtown eco-complex. Zuri, your firm's integration of sustainable materials is setting an entirely new benchmark for the city, stated Richard Sterling, a senior partner at a massive private equity firm. We have a 60-acre commercial plot just outside the northern perimeter. We have been struggling with the zoning, but your approach to carbon-neutral development is exactly what the City Council is demanding right now. We would love to discuss a joint venture. I smiled, raising my crystal glass. I appreciate the offer, Richard. My firm is highly selective about our partnerships right now, but we are always open to evaluating prime real estate. Send my office the preliminary land surveys, and I will have my team run a feasibility audit by next week. The circle of billionaires nodded in absolute genuine respect. I had them entirely in the palm of my hand. I was operating at the very peak of the Atlanta hierarchy, securing leverage-making deals and solidifying my empire based solely on my own merit. And that was exactly the moment my mother decided she could no longer stand being outside the spotlight. I saw Vivian approaching from the corner of my eye. She practically shoved past a city councilman to reach our circle. Her smile was blinding, razor-sharp, and completely fabricated. She stepped right into the center of the elite circle of investors carrying the heavy scent of imported gardenias and desperate self-preservation. She recognized the men I was talking to. She knew they controlled billions in capital. She needed them to believe that she was the architect of my success to somehow bind her sinking ship to my rising star. "There is my brilliant girl," Vivian announced, her voice pitched loud enough to ensure every single person in a 10-foot radius heard her perfectly. She reached out and wrapped a heavy, possessive arm tightly around my bare shoulders, pulling me into a suffocating, deeply unwanted half-embrace. My spine went completely rigid, but Vivian ignored the physical rejection. She beamed at the investors, her manicured fingers digging into my collarbone. "I see you have all cornered Atlanta's premier commercial developer," Vivian continued, projecting the image of a doting, fiercely proud matriarch. "You know I tell everyone that Zuri's success is the absolute pride of the Wilson family. It takes a very special kind of upbringing to forge this kind of resilience in the business world." Richard Sterling smiled politely, lowering his champagne glass. "She is a force of nature, Vivian. You and Desmond must be incredibly proud of what she has accomplished. Vivian let out a rehearsed musical laugh that grated against my eardrums. Oh, we are simply thrilled. But I always tell people, greatness is not born, it is molded. I stared straight ahead, my jaw clenching so hard my teeth ached. She was actually doing it. She was standing in the middle of the most important room in the city, preparing to hijack the narrative of my survival. I always pushed Zuri to excel in real estate, Vivian declared to the captivated audience of investors. When she was just starting out, she was young and naive. She wanted things handed to her. She wanted the easy road, relying on her father's money to build her business. But Desmond and I knew better. We knew that true strength comes from adversity. Vivian looked around the circle, making sure her audience was hanging on to her revisionist history. She squeezed my shoulder tighter, cementing the lie. We practice tough love, Vivian said, her voice dropping into a tone of profound fake maternal wisdom. We forced her to stand on her own 2 feet. We made the incredibly difficult parenting decision to cut off her safety net so she would truly learn the value of a dollar. It broke my heart at the time to push her out of the nest, but look at her now. My tough love is exactly what made her the millionaire she is today. She is a true Wilson, built from the ground up by our family standards. The sheer concentrated toxicity of her lie hung in the heavy ballroom air. She was rewriting my trauma. She was rebranding my homelessness, my starvation, and my absolute misery into a masterclass of her own brilliant parenting. She was claiming the glittering crown for a kingdom she had actively tried to burn to the ground. She was using my blood, sweat, and tears to desperately patch the holes in her own bankrupt reputation. I thought about the thick black binder sitting in my lawyer's biometric safe. I thought about the $10 million in fraudulent loans her precious son-in-law had taken out. I thought about the winter nights I spent shivering in the front seat of a Honda Civic because this woman told me I was wasting space in her mansion. I did not smile. I did not laugh. I did not offer a polite daughterly nod to maintain the fragile social peace of the gala. I turned my head slowly and looked directly into Vivian's eyes. The fake glowing warmth in her expression faltered for a fraction of a second as she saw the absolute terrifying void in my gaze. I reached up with my free hand. I clamped my fingers firmly around her wrist. I squeezed hard enough to make her gasp softly, ensuring she felt the raw physical power I held. I pulled her hand off my shoulder. I peeled her arm away from my body with slow, deliberate, and unmistakable disgust. I let her arm drop limply back to her side. The movement was so cold, so entirely devoid of any familial warmth or social grace, that the oxygen in the circle instantly evaporated. The string quartet playing softly in the background suddenly sounded very far away. The group of wealthy investors stopped smiling, their eyes darting nervously between my mother and me. The hum of conversation in our immediate vicinity died instantly. The crowd around us went dead silent. I held my mother's wrist in midair for a fraction of a second longer than necessary, ensuring the entire circle of elite investors witnessed the absolute physical boundary I was establishing. Then, I let her hand drop. It fell against the heavy silk of her designer gown with a soft, pathetic rustle. The silence that rippled through the immediate vicinity was profound. Richard Sterling, the private equity billionaire who had just offered me a joint venture, stood perfectly still. The other power brokers in the circle instinctively took a half step back, creating a physical arena for the confrontation. They were predators by nature, and they could smell the distinct metallic scent of blood in the water. Vivian tried to salvage the moment. Her facial muscles twitched as she forced her lips back into a strained artificial smile. She let out a high-pitched, breathy laugh that sounded like cracking glass. "Zuri, darling," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You have always been so fiercely independent, so serious about your boundaries. I was just telling Richard and the others how your drive is a testament to our family values." I did not break eye contact. My voice when I finally spoke was not raised. It did not hold a single trace of anger or hysterical emotion. It was calm, measured, and utterly lethal. It was the voice of a woman executing a flawless demolition. "Let us correct the public record, Vivian," I said. My tone carried clearly over the soft strains of the string quartet, reaching the ears of every influential guest standing within 20 feet. You did not push me to excel in real estate. You did not practice tough love to mold me into a millionaire. You threw me out of my childhood home on a freezing November night because my desire to work for a living embarrassed your country club sensibilities. Vivian swallowed hard, her perfectly manicured hands fluttering nervously near her diamond necklace. Zuri, please, this is a charity gala. We do not need to exaggerate the past for an audience. I am not exaggerating a single detail. I continued stepping slightly closer to her and forcing her to hold my gaze. You gave me 10 minutes to pack a single duffel bag. You locked the deadbolt while I was still standing on the front porch. I slept in a compact Honda Civic. I showered in public gyms. I survived on discarded bagels from a coffee shop while I studied for my real estate exams. My resilience is entirely my own. You do not get to claim the harvest of a field you actively tried to burn with your own 2 hands. Richard Sterling cleared his throat, looking at Vivian with an expression of thinly veiled disgust. The other investors exchanged quiet, calculating glances. In their world, ruthlessness was respected, but abandoning your own child to the streets to protect a fragile social image was considered a grotesque liability. Vivian's face flushed a deep mottled crimson. Her breathing turned shallow and rapid. You are making a scene, Zuri. You are deliberately trying to humiliate your father and me in front of our peers. We did what we thought was best for the family structure. We invested our resources where they were most needed. I smiled, a slow, glacial curvature of my lips that made Vivian take an involuntary step backward. Yes, let us talk about where you invested your resources, I said, projecting my voice just a fraction more, ensuring the circle of eavesdroppers widened. While I was clawing my way out of poverty, you and Desmond were writing $2 million in blank checks to your son-in-law. You funded a holistic wellness spa that you paraded around as a massive success. But you were too busy taking credit for my achievements to actually audit your own books. Zuri, stop it right now! Vivian hissed, dropping the maternal facade completely. Her voice was a venomous whisper, but I refused to lower mine. Connor Sterling did not just mismanage your money, Vivian, I announced, addressing the circle of investors just as much as I was addressing my mother. He systematically embezzled every single cent. He created fraudulent shell companies. Apex Holistic Sourcing, Elevate Consulting Group. He drafted fake vendor invoices and routed your $2 million directly into his private offshore accounts. He bought luxury sports cars and first-class tickets to Dubai, while the spa sat completely empty. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. I saw Richard Sterling's eyes widen in genuine shock. The word embezzlement in a room full of private equity managers was like a bomb going off. It is a lie, Vivian stammered, her hands shaking violently. You are lying because you are jealous of your sister. Connor is a brilliant financial mind. Connor is a cornered rat, I corrected smoothly. And his brilliance just bankrupted your entire estate. He did not just steal your $2 million. To cover his tracks, he took out $10 million in fraudulent lines of credit. And because he is such a brilliant financial mind, he did not use banks. He used private, unregulated lenders, loan sharks, Vivian, and he made Imani the primary guarantor on every single loan. Vivian stumbled backward as if I had physically struck her. She bumped into a passing waiter, sending a tray of champagne flutes, rattling, but nobody moved to help her. The social elite of Atlanta were backing away, pulling their expensive gowns and tailored suits out of the blast radius. You are standing in this ballroom hosting a $1 million charity gala, pretending you are the absolute pinnacle of high society, I said, my voice dropping to a final devastating register. But the truth is, you are completely destitute. You are harboring a felon. And the people Connor owes $10 million to are actively looking for him. Your false kingdom is completely bankrupt, Vivian. There is nothing left but the ghosts of the money you threw away. I turned my back on her, leaving her hyperventilating and trembling in the center of the ballroom. I intended to walk out the front doors and leave the Wilson family to the absolute ruin they had orchestrated for themselves. But I had underestimated the sheer volatile vanity of my sister. Imani had been standing near the ice sculpture posing for photographs when the murmurs of the crowd shifted. She had abandoned her photographer and pushed her way through the gathering throngs of guests, arriving just in time to hear me expose her husband as a criminal and her entire life as a fraudulent illusion. Imani's entire identity was wrapped in the pristine, flawless perception of her wealth. Hearing the word bankrupt applied to her name in the middle of the St. Regis ballroom shattered her fragile reality. "You lying, jealous witch!" Imani shrieked, her voice tearing through the elegant atmosphere of the gala like a siren. I turned back just as my sister lunged past our paralyzed mother. Imani's face was contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. She had snatched a full glass of dark vintage red wine from a nearby table. She was charging across the polished marble floor, her custom white silk dress billowing behind her like a sail. She did not care about the investors. She did not care about the social consequences. She only wanted to destroy the person who had stripped away her glittering facade. Imani raised the heavy crystal glass, aiming directly for the bodice of my emerald green gown. She threw the wine with all the strength her fury could muster, a vicious, sweeping arc of dark crimson liquid, meant to publicly humiliate me and brand me as the villain of the evening. I did not flinch. I did not raise my hands to protect my face. I simply executed a flawless pivot. I shifted my weight to my left heel and stepped smoothly out of the trajectory. The wave of red wine sailed harmlessly past my shoulder, missing the silk of my dress by mere inches. But the wine did not hit the floor. A sharp, horrified scream echoed through the ballroom. I turned to see where the liquid had landed. Standing directly behind where I had been positioned was an older woman with striking silver hair wearing an immaculate hand-beaded silver couture gown. The entire glass of dark red wine had struck her squarely in the chest. The crimson liquid splashed violently across her collarbone, soaking into the delicate silver beads and dripping down the front of her priceless dress like a gaping, bloody wound. The woman gasped, clutching her ruined chest, her eyes wide with absolute shock. The silence that followed was not just the quiet of a scandal. It was the terrified, breathless vacuum of a catastrophic political disaster. The woman dripping in vintage red wine was Eleanor Harrison. She was not just a wealthy socialite. She was the wife of Thomas Harrison, the Chief Judge of the United States District Court for the Northern District of Georgia. He was arguably the most powerful federal magistrate in the entire state. Judge Harrison, who had been speaking with the gala organizers, rushed forward. His face turned a violent shade of purple as he pulled a silk handkerchief from his tuxedo pocket and began frantically dabbing at his wife's ruined gown. He looked up, glaring at Imani with an expression that promised absolute legal annihilation. "Are you completely out of your mind?" The federal judge roared, his voice shaking the crystal chandeliers above us. "You assault my wife at a public charity event. I will have you arrested for battery this instant. Security, call the police." Total chaos erupted. The polite veneer of the Atlanta elite vanished instantly. Guests began shouting, pulling out their smartphones to record the disaster. Waiters scrambled frantically to clean the floor. The string quartet abruptly stopped playing, abandoning their instruments. Imani froze, staring at the ruined silver gown, her hands hovering over her mouth in sheer terror. The reality of what she had just done, assaulting the wife of a federal judge in a room full of cameras, finally pierced through her blind rage. Desmond materialized out of the crowd, moving with the desperate, frantic speed of a man watching his entire legacy burn to ash. He shoved past a group of city councilmen, grabbing Imani tightly by the bicep. "Do not say a word," Desmond hissed at his daughter, pulling her forcefully backward. "Keep your mouth shut and keep walking. We are leaving right now." He wrapped his arm around Imani's waist, practically dragging her stumbling frame across the marble floor toward the side exit to avoid the gathering security guards. Vivian followed close behind them, hiding her face behind her sequined clutch, weeping tears of profound, absolute social ruin. As they reached the heavy brass doors of the side exit, Desmond stopped. He turned back, facing the chaotic, swirling ballroom. His eyes locked onto mine across the sea of panicked guests and ruined reputations. The mask of the polished Southern gentleman was completely gone, replaced by the desperate, vicious snarl of a cornered beast. He pointed a shaking, rigid finger directly at my face. He did not care who was listening. He did not care that his family had just committed social suicide. "You did this!" Desmond roared, his voice raw and echoing with pure venom. "You destroyed us, Zuri. But you listened to me. You owe this family for every brick of your company. You owe this family for your startup capital. I am going to tear your firm down to the studs. I will see you in court." He turned and dragged my sobbing sister through the brass doors, disappearing into the humid Atlanta night. I stood perfectly still amidst the screaming guests and the flashing cameras of the socialites. I ignored the frantic security guards rushing past me toward the exit. I processed my father's final desperate words. "You owe this family for your startup capital." It was an insane, completely fabricated claim. I had built my first brokerage account from a tiny portfolio of starter homes. I had never taken a single dime from the Wilson estate. But Desmond was not a man who made empty legal threats in public, unless he had forged a weapon to back them up. He had already proven he was willing to use corrupt city officials to destroy me. Now he was threatening the very foundation of my $50 million empire. The extortion had failed. The social war was over. But as I watched the brass doors swing shut, I knew the real battle was just beginning. I pulled my phone from my clutch and dialed Elias Thorne. It was time to go for the throat. 48 hours had passed since the spectacular implosion of the Wilson family at the St. Regis Hotel. The fallout dominated every local news outlet and high society whisper network in Atlanta. Imani had been formally charged with simple battery and disorderly conduct by a furious federal Judge Harrison. Desmond and Vivian were effectively excommunicated from the city elite. Their carefully curated empire of perception had burned to the ground in less than 5 minutes. I was sitting at the massive drafting table in my corner office, running my fingers over the revised electrical schematics for the Midtown Eco Complex. The site was humming with activity again. Concrete was curing. Steel beams were being hoisted into the humid Georgia sky. I had protected my vision and secured my future. For the first time in a week, I actually felt a profound sense of peace. That peace lasted exactly until my office intercom buzzed. Zuri, my assistant Maya, said, her voice tight with confusion. "There is a gentleman in the lobby insisting he needs to hand-deliver a package to you personally. He refused to leave it with security. He says it is a priority legal parcel." "Send him up," I replied, keeping my eyes on the blueprints. I assumed it was Elias sending over the finalized countersuit paperwork against the local zoning commission. The heavy glass door to my office swung open. A man in a nondescript gray suit walked in. He did not look like a corporate courier. He looked tired and entirely devoid of emotion. He approached my desk and pulled a thick manila envelope from his leather satchel. "Zuri Wilson," he asked. I stood up. "Yes." "You have been served," he said, dropping the heavy envelope onto the center of my blueprints. He turned on his heel and walked out without another word. I stared at the brown package. A cold, familiar dread pooled in the pit of my stomach. Desmond had screamed that he would see me in court as he dragged my sister out of the gala. He had claimed I owed the family for my startup capital. I had assumed it was the desperate raving of a humiliated man trying to save face in front of the Atlanta elite. I had underestimated his capacity for sheer malicious delusion. I ripped open the flap and pulled out a thick stack of stapled legal documents. The header bore the official seal of the Fulton County Superior Court. I scanned the bold black print at the top of the page. Plaintiffs Desmond and Vivian Wilson. Defendant Zuri Wilson and Vanguard Eco Development, LLC. I flipped to the summary of claims and the breath left my lungs. They were suing me for 20% of my $50 million commercial real estate firm. The lawsuit alleged breach of contract, breach of fiduciary duty, and corporate theft. According to the fabricated narrative printed on the page, my parents had provided a $50,000 seed investment precisely 5 years ago to launch my initial brokerage business. They were claiming that this fictitious money entitled them to a permanent equity stake in my entire corporate portfolio. I snatched my car keys off the desk and ran for the private elevator. 20 minutes later, I stormed through the heavy mahogany doors of Elias Thorne's law firm. I bypassed his receptionist entirely and marched straight into his corner office. Elias was already sitting at his glass desk reviewing a digital copy of the exact same lawsuit on his dual monitors. "Tell me you are reading this absolute fiction," I demanded, slamming the physical documents onto his desk. "They are suing me for a fifth of my company based on an investment that never existed. They threw me out into the freezing cold with nothing but the clothes on my back. I slept in a compact car. I did not take a single dime from them. How can they legally file a claim for money they never gave me?" Elias leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers together. His face was a mask of cold professional calculation. "Anyone can file a lawsuit for anything, Zuri. The court does not verify the truth of the claims before stamping the filing. They only require the plaintiff to submit a basic preliminary exhibit to establish a reasonable cause of action." He clicked a button on his mouse, and a high-resolution scan of a financial document appeared on a large monitor facing me. "Desmond provided an exhibit," Elias said, gesturing to the screen. "Look at it." I stepped closer to the monitor. It was a digital scan of a canceled personal check drawn from a joint account belonging to Desmond and Vivian Wilson. The check was made out directly to Zuri Wilson in the amount of $50,000. The date in the upper right corner was November 12th. I stared at the date. The numbers burned into my retinas. November 12th was the exact day they had changed the locks on the Buckhead mansion and banished me to the streets. "Look at the endorsement signature on the back," Elias instructed, his voice dropping an octave. He switched the image. On the back of the check, scrawled in black ink, was my signature. I felt a surge of absolute blinding rage. "I did not sign that," I said, my voice trembling with suppressed fury. "That is a forgery. It looks close enough to pass a casual glance, but the loop on the Z is entirely wrong. I never saw that check. I never touched that money. They wrote a check to me, forged my name on the back, and then deposited it into a different account to manufacture a paper trail." Elias nodded slowly. "I know it is a forgery, Zuri, and Desmond knows it is a forgery. But the judge reviewing the initial filing does not know that yet. The judge only sees a canceled check with your name on it from exactly 5 years ago when you were securing your broker license." "Why would they go through this elaborate charade?" I asked, pacing the length of his Persian rug. "Desmond is a smart businessman. He knows that the moment we bring in a forensic handwriting expert, this entire lawsuit falls apart. He knows we can trace the routing numbers on the back of that check to prove exactly which bank account the money actually went into. He cannot win a trial with forged documents. He is walking right into a perjury charge." Elias leaned forward, resting his elbows on the glass desk. "Desmond does not intend to take this to trial, Zuri. He does not care about winning a verdict in front of a jury 2 years from now. He needs cash right now. Connor owes $10 million to unregulated offshore lenders. Those lenders are breathing down Desmond's neck, demanding payment. Your father filed this lawsuit as a tactical strike to trigger an immediate financial freeze." I stopped pacing. "What do you mean, a financial freeze?" "Tucked inside this lawsuit is an emergency petition for an injunction," Elias explained, picking up a printed page and highlighting a specific paragraph. "Desmond's lawyers are arguing that because the ownership of your $50 million development firm is now actively disputed in a court of law, you pose a flight risk. They are petitioning the judge to freeze all of your corporate operating accounts and place a hold on your construction permits until the ownership dispute is resolved." A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the office. "He is trying to lock my bank accounts," I whispered, the sheer brutality of the strategy washing over me. "Exactly," Elias confirmed, his eyes completely devoid of sympathy. "If the judge grants the temporary injunction, you will not be able to pay your contractors on Friday. You will not be able to buy materials. The Midtown Eco Complex will grind to a permanent halt. You will default on your commercial loan within 30 days. Desmond is using a frivolous lawsuit to financially paralyze you. He is betting that you will agree to settle out of court and pay him $10 million to drop the suit just so you can unfreeze your assets and save your project." They were trying to hold my masterpiece hostage. They had failed to use the local zoning commission to stop my concrete trucks, so now they were weaponizing the state judicial system to drain my bank accounts. Desmond wanted me to write him a $10 million settlement check so he could pay off Connor's loan sharks. He was perfectly willing to destroy everything I had built to protect his fraudulent golden boy. My hands curled into tight fists. I closed my eyes and took a deep, steadying breath. I pushed the anger down into a dark, locked box inside my chest. Panic was a useless emotion. Anger was a liability. I needed cold, calculating logic. I opened my eyes and looked at the forged check glowing on the computer monitor. I looked at the date. November 12th, 5 years ago. Elias. I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously calm whisper. In order to process an injunction of this magnitude, a judge requires a discovery phase, correct? The plaintiff has to prove the origin of the funds and the intent of the investment. Yes, Elias replied cautiously. A judge will mandate a preliminary discovery period. We will have the right to request financial documents to verify their claims. I walked back to his desk and tapped my manicured fingernail against the monitor right over Desmond's forged signature. 5 years ago was the exact same month Desmond wrote that initial $2 million check to Connor to fund the holistic wellness spa. I said, the puzzle pieces locking together with lethal precision. 5 years ago was the exact moment Connor created those offshore shell companies and started funneling my parents' wealth into the dark web to cover his gambling debts. Elias sat perfectly still, his dark eyes widening slightly as the magnitude of my realization hit him. Desmond thinks he is trapping me in a legal corner. I continued, a slow, predatory smile spreading across my face. He thinks an asset freeze will force me to surrender. But the civil discovery process works both ways. If my father wants to step into a federal courtroom and claim he gave me $50,000 5 years ago, he has to hand over his complete banking ledgers from that exact time period to prove it. I leaned over the glass desk, looking directly into my lawyer's eyes. Let them proceed to discovery, Elias. Do not block the injunction petition. Agree to it. Because the second the judge opens the discovery phase, Desmond and Vivian will be legally mandated to open their books to prove they gave me that money. And when they do, we get to look at absolutely everything. We are going to find every single stolen dollar, every offshore account, and every loan shark payment Connor ever made. They just handed us the keys to their own financial execution. Let the games begin. The heavy oak door of the conference room clicked shut, sealing us inside a soundproof vault of polished mahogany and frosted glass. The legal deposition was scheduled for 10 in the morning, but Desmond Wilson arrived exactly 12 minutes late. It was a classic power play. He wanted to force me to wait, to remind me that he dictated the schedule of the world around him. I sat perfectly still in the high-backed leather chair, staring at the blank legal pad in front of me. I did not check my watch. I did not look at the door. I simply waited for the prey to walk into the trap. Desmond strolled into the room with his defense attorney, a man named Harrison, who looked far too eager to bill a wealthy client for a frivolous lawsuit. My father wore a charcoal gray bespoke suit that screamed old money and absolute arrogance. He paused for a fraction of a second when his eyes met mine, expecting to see fear, or perhaps a desperate plea for reconciliation. Instead, he found a completely blank wall of absolute calm. His jaw tightened, but he quickly recovered, sliding into the chair across from me with a smug, practiced smile. Elias Thorne sat beside me, radiating the cold, dangerous energy of an apex predator. He did not offer a handshake. He simply nodded to the court reporter to begin the official transcript. We are here today to discuss the plaintiff's claim of a $50,000 seed investment allegedly provided to my client Zuri Wilson exactly 5 years ago. Elias began, his voice echoing sharply against the glass walls. Mr. Wilson, you have stated under oath in your initial filings that this money was not a gift, but a formal capital injection meant to secure a permanent 20% equity stake in Vanguard Eco Development. Is that correct? Desmond leaned forward, resting his forearms on the heavy wooden table. That is absolutely correct. I saw potential in my daughter. I provided the foundational capital she needed to get her real estate license and purchase her first commercial lots. Without my money, her company would not exist. I am simply claiming the equity I am legally owed. Elias did not even blink. He reached into his briefcase and extracted a thin file. And you brought documentation to substantiate this financial transfer. Harrison Desmond's attorney smiled triumphantly and slid a bound folder across the table. We have the internal family accounting ledgers. This document, which we are submitting into evidence, clearly shows the transfer of funds. Elias picked up the folder. Let the record reflect I am examining the document provided by the plaintiff. We will refer to this file by its name verbatim. It is labeled A_11 in your internal directory. Elias opened the file and studied the page. A beautifully fabricated spreadsheet stared back at us. It showed a flawless record of $50,000 leaving Desmond's account on November 12th. This is an internal ledger, Elias noted, his tone conversational. It is essentially a spreadsheet you typed up yourself, Mr. Wilson. Do you have the actual certified bank statements from the financial institution to corroborate this exact entry in A_11? Desmond scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. My internal accounting is meticulous. The ledger is perfectly accurate. The bank statements from 5 years ago are in deep storage, but this document is more than sufficient to prove the transaction occurred. Elias slowly closed the forged ledger and placed it face down on the table. It is fascinating that you mentioned deep storage, Mr. Wilson, because when you filed a lawsuit attempting to freeze a $50 million commercial development firm, you opened the door to a very aggressive discovery phase. We did not want to wait for your deep storage. We went directly to your financial institution with a federal subpoena. The smug smile completely vanished from Desmond's face. Harrison shifted uncomfortably in his leather chair. Elias reached down into his thick leather briefcase and pulled out 2 massive, heavily bound stacks of paper. Each stack was stamped with the official raised seal of Zenith National Commercial Bank. I have here the certified, unredacted bank records for every single account bearing the name Desmond Wilson or Vivian Wilson for the past 7 years. Elias announced, his voice slicing through the suddenly heavy air of the conference room. Let the record reflect, I am submitting these certified financial documents into evidence. There is a file you can reference named B_11. Refer to this file by its name verbatim. And there is a file you can reference named C_11. Refer to this file by its name verbatim. Elias slid the massive stacks into the center of the table. Desmond stared at the certified documents as if they were venomous snakes. The color began to drain rapidly from his face, leaving his skin a sickly pale gray. I have reviewed the entirety of B11 and C11. Elias continued, his gaze locking onto Desmond with terrifying intensity. And I found something incredibly interesting, Mr. Wilson. There is no $50,000 transfer to Zuri Wilson on November 12th. There is no $50,000 transfer to Zuri Wilson on any date in the past 5 years. The internal ledger you just submitted under oath is a complete and absolute forgery. You just committed perjury on the official legal record. Harrison bolted upright, his chair screeching against the floor. I object to this line of questioning. My client may have misremembered the exact account the funds were drawn from. He did not misremember anything, Elias fired back, his voice booming through the room. But while we were reviewing these certified records, we did notice where the money was actually going. We noticed a massive catastrophic hemorrhaging of funds. Elias flipped open the first certified bank file. Let us look at the real financial history. 5 years ago, you wrote a $2 million check to an LLC controlled by Connor Sterling. Over the next 48 months, you continued to bleed cash to cover the operational losses of a completely fraudulent wellness spa. But $2 million was just the beginning, was it not? Desmond Connor kept coming back for more. He told you he needed capital to expand. He told you he needed bridge loans. Desmond sat paralyzed. His hands were gripping the edge of the mahogany table so tightly, his knuckles were stark white. He could not speak. The walls of his carefully constructed lies were collapsing directly on top of him. You drained your liquid assets 3 years ago, Elias stated ruthlessly, turning another page. But Connor still needed cash to pay off his offshore debts. So you leveraged your primary asset. C_11 clearly details the transaction. You took out a second mortgage on your primary residence in Buckhead for $1.5 million. You handed that money directly to Connor. 18 months later, when that money vanished into thin air, you took out a third mortgage for an additional $2.5 million. I watched my father crumble. The great Desmond Wilson, the man who had banished me to the streets for lacking ambition, the man who had threatened to destroy my $50 million eco-complex, was nothing but an empty shell holding up a mountain of toxic debt. You do not own 20% of my client's firm, Elias concluded, slamming the certified file shut with a sound like a gunshot. You do not even own the house you sleep in. You owe $4 million in high-interest commercial mortgages, and according to the certified bank records, those mortgages are currently 90 days past due. You are in active default, Mr. Wilson. Your mansion is going into foreclosure. You filed this frivolous lawsuit because you are drowning, and you wanted to steal your daughter's life raft. Harrison began frantically shoving his documents back into his briefcase. We are terminating this deposition immediately. We will review these documents and respond accordingly. Desmond did not say a single word. He stood up on shaking legs, completely avoiding my gaze. He looked like a man walking to his own execution. He turned and stumbled out of the conference room, his lawyer chasing after him. The heavy oak door clicked shut, leaving me and Elias in the absolute silence of total victory. The silence in the conference room stretched for a full minute after Desmond and his lawyer fled. The court reporter quietly packed up her transcription machine and slipped out the side door, leaving me alone with Elias. My lawyer began organizing the massive stacks of certified bank records, but my eyes were locked onto the bold blue logo printed at the top of the mortgage documents. Zenith National Commercial. The name echoed in my mind, triggering a cascade of strategic calculations. Zenith National was not just the bank holding my father's distressed $4 million mortgages. Zenith National was the exact same financial institution that held the operational accounts for Vanguard Eco Development. They were the bank that underwrote the $50 million construction loan for my Midtown project. I was one of their most lucrative, high-net-worth commercial clients in the entire Southeast region. Elias, I said, my voice breaking the silence as I reached across the mahogany table and pulled the mortgage default notices toward me. Who is the primary loan officer assigned to the Buckhead residential portfolio at Zenith National? Elias looked up, pausing his packing. He adjusted his glasses and leaned over to read the signature line on the default notices. It looks like a senior vice president named Gregory Vance. Why do you ask? I pulled my cell phone from my emerald green blazer pocket. Because Gregory Vance is the same man who begs me to attend his quarterly golf tournaments so he can brag about securing the Vanguard Eco Development accounts. He manages commercial and high-risk residential portfolios. My father owes his department $4 million and is 90 days past due. I unlocked my phone and scrolled through my encrypted contacts. I found Gregory Vance's direct private line and hit the dial button. I put the phone on speaker and set it on the glass desk. The line rang twice before a smooth, overly enthusiastic voice answered. Zuri Wilson, what an absolute pleasure to hear from you. Gregory Vance said, his tone dripping with the kind of deference reserved exclusively for clients holding 8-figure balances. Please tell me you are calling to confirm your attendance at the charity golf scramble next month. I am calling to schedule an emergency meeting, Gregory, I replied, keeping my voice strictly professional. I need to be in your executive boardroom in exactly 1 hour. Clear your schedule. Bring your legal team and the director of your distressed asset division. There was a brief, panicked pause on the other end of the line. Of course, Zuri. Is there a problem with the Midtown construction draw? We can expedite any funds you need. The Midtown project is perfectly fine, I stated. I am coming in to discuss an acquisition. Have your team ready. I ended the call and looked up at Elias. His dark eyes were gleaming with predatory understanding. He slowly slid the certified bank records back into his briefcase and snapped the lock shut. You are going to buy the debt, Elias said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. You are going to step into Zenith National and purchase the paper on your parents' house. Desmond wanted to play corporate warfare, I replied, grabbing my bag and walking toward the door. I am just making sure I own the battlefield. An hour later, my matte black SUV pulled into the VIP parking garage beneath the towering glass skyscraper of Zenith National Commercial Bank. I rode the private executive elevator to the top floor, where the air was heavily filtered and smelled of expensive cedar and floor wax. The bank's receptionist immediately leaped to her feet and escorted me directly into the grand executive boardroom. Gregory Vance was waiting for me, surrounded by three anxious-looking bank executives. They all stood up perfectly synchronized the moment I crossed the threshold. "Zuri, please sit," Gregory said, gesturing to the plush leather chair at the head of the massive granite table. "We pulled the regional directors as you requested. How can Zenith National facilitate your acquisition today? Are we looking at a new commercial plot in the city?" I sat down and placed my hands flat on the cool granite surface. "I am not looking to acquire real estate today, Gregory. I am looking to acquire paper." The executives exchanged confused glances. Gregory leaned forward, adjusting his silk tie. "I am not sure I understand, Zuri. Vanguard Eco Development is a construction and development firm. You do not deal in secondary debt markets. I deal in whatever secures my corporate interests," I replied smoothly. "Zenith National is currently holding a significant amount of distressed toxic residential debt in the Buckhead area. You have highly leveraged mortgages that are actively in default. Those non-performing loans are a liability on your quarterly balance sheets. I want to help you clean up your ledgers." I opened my briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper, sliding it across the granite table. "I am offering to purchase a bundled portfolio of your highest-risk 90-day defaulted residential mortgages in the Buckhead zip code. I will pay a 10% premium over the current market value of the distressed debt. You get to instantly offload a toxic liability and show a cash profit for the quarter. In exchange, I take absolute unmitigated ownership of the paper." The director of the Distressed Asset Division picked up the paper and stared at the numbers. His eyes widened. "You are offering to buy $4 million of toxic debt at a premium, Zuri? This is incredibly generous, but these are highly contested residential foreclosures. The legal fees to extract the properties from the current owners will be astronomical. Why would Vanguard Eco Development want this burden?" "That is my burden to manage," I stated, keeping my expression completely unreadable. "Zenith National has profited immensely from my construction loans. I am offering you a golden parachute to fix your residential balance sheets. Do we have a deal, or do I need to take my $50 million operating accounts to a bank that is more cooperative?" The threat was subtle but absolutely devastating. Gregory Vance visibly swallowed hard. He looked at the distressed asset director, who immediately nodded in frantic agreement. "We can absolutely structure this acquisition, Zuri," Gregory said, his voice slightly breathless. "We will have our legal department bundle the specific Buckhead defaults into a custom portfolio. We can execute the transfer of ownership by the end of the business day." "Make it happen," I instructed, standing up from the table. I spent the next 3 hours sitting in a private VIP lounge, drinking sparkling water, while Zenith National's legal department scrambled to draft the massive acquisition contracts. They were terrified of losing my business, and they moved with unprecedented speed. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Gregory Vance walked into the lounge carrying a thick stack of finalized contracts bound in a dark blue leather folder. "The portfolio transfer is complete, Zuri," Gregory said, sliding the folder onto the coffee table in front of me. "You are now the sole owner of the designated distressed debt package." I picked up the gold-plated pen he offered and signed my name on the final execution line. The ink dried instantly, sealing the transaction. I did not bother to read the boilerplate legal jargon. I flipped directly to the attached appendix, which listed the specific properties bundled into the toxic debt portfolio. There it was printed in stark, undeniable black and white. The primary residence of Desmond and Vivian Wilson. I stared at the address. The massive, sprawling mansion with the grand circular driveway. The house where I had grown up. The house where they had laughed at my dreams. The house they had physically locked me out of on a freezing November night because I refused to be their compliant trophy daughter. I closed the leather folder and handed the pen back to Gregory. A profound, chilling sense of absolute power washed over me. Desmond had threatened to take 20% of my company. He had threatened to destroy my eco-complex. He had tried to freeze my bank accounts to save himself from the criminal fallout of his beloved son-in-law. But he had failed. He was completely out of moves. I stood up and walked out of the bank, the heavy leather folder securely tucked under my arm. I stepped back into the sweltering Atlanta heat and looked up at the towering glass skyscrapers. The city belonged to me now. I pulled my cell phone from my pocket and dialed Elias Thorne. "The paperwork is signed Elias," I said as I climbed into the back of my waiting SUV. "The acquisition is fully executed." Elias let out a low, appreciative whistle on the other end of the line. "You actually did it. You bought the paper." "I own the debt, Elias." I confirmed, my voice cold and hard as diamond. "I am officially Desmond and Vivian Wilson's primary creditor. I hold the deed to their false kingdom." "What is your first order of business as their new lender?" Elias asked, the anticipation clear in his tone. "Draft the formal eviction notices," I commanded, staring out the tinted windows as the SUV merged onto the interstate. "Send the county sheriffs to the Buckhead mansion tomorrow morning. Desmond and Vivian Wilson have exactly 10 minutes to pack a single duffel bag and vacate my property. Let us see how much they appreciate a lesson in tough love." The crisp autumn air of Thanksgiving Day settled over the affluent neighborhood of Buckhead like a heavy, suffocating blanket. The towering oak trees lining the perfectly manicured streets had shed their golden leaves, leaving the sprawling estates looking stark and exposed against the darkening November sky. At the end of a long circular driveway stood the Wilson family mansion. Every window on the first floor was blazing with warm, golden light. A fleet of luxury vehicles was parked along the cobblestone path, signaling to the world that Desmond and Vivian were hosting their annual holiday gathering. They were calling it a relaunch dinner. It was a desperate, calculated public relations maneuver designed to erase the catastrophic humiliation of the St. Regis Charity Gala. My parents had spent the last several weeks frantically calling every aunt, uncle, and wealthy cousin in our extended family tree, assuring them that the rumors swirling through Atlanta were nothing but malicious gossip. They needed an audience to validate their existence. More importantly, they needed fresh blood to bleed dry. I sat in the back of my idling SUV parked discreetly down the street, watching the silhouettes of my relatives moving past the sheer linen curtains of the formal dining room. I was wearing a sharply tailored crimson-red designer pantsuit that fit like absolute armor. Resting on the leather seat beside me was a sleek black biometric briefcase. My phone vibrated in my palm. It was a secure encrypted text message from Elias Thorne. The wiretaps on Connor's remaining burner phones just picked up a massive surge in activity, Elias wrote. "Your brother-in-law is moving in for the kill. He is actively pitching a new shell company to your extended family right now. He is calling it Quantum Health Tech. He is trying to secure a minimum of $500,000 in seed capital before midnight to hold off the loan sharks." I locked my phone and slipped it into my pocket. Connor Sterling was a parasite of the highest order. Having completely drained my parents of their wealth and having failed to extort me through a frivolous lawsuit, he was now turning his predatory gaze toward my aunts and uncles. He was planning to drain their retirement accounts and college funds to save his own skin. I grabbed the handle of the black briefcase. I stepped out of the SUV and walked up the long cobblestone driveway. I did not ring the doorbell. I knew the security access code to the side entrance near the catering kitchen. I bypassed the hired waitstaff, who were busy plating roasted turkey and expensive sage stuffing. I moved silently through the marble hallways, guided by the sound of clinking crystal and the smooth, practiced cadence of Connor's voice. I stepped into the archway of the formal dining room and stopped. The scene before me was a masterpiece of sheer financial delusion. The massive mahogany dining table was covered in fine china sterling silver cutlery and towering floral arrangements of imported white roses. Desmond sat at the head of the table, pouring a vintage Cabernet Sauvignon with a forced, jovial smile. Vivian was draped in her signature pearls, looking pale but determined as she urged Aunt Beatrice to try the caviar appetizers. Standing at the opposite end of the table was Connor. He was holding a glossy presentation brochure, speaking with the charismatic fervor of a megachurch pastor. Imani sat beside him, nodding enthusiastically, playing the role of the devoted, supportive wife. Quantum Health Tech is not just a company, Uncle Charles Connor said, leaning forward and making direct, sincere eye contact with my wealthy uncle. It is a paradigm shift in personalized biometric medicine. We have proprietary algorithms that map cellular regeneration, but we are keeping the initial Series A funding round strictly within the family. I want the people sitting at this table to reap the dividends. A $50,000 investment tonight guarantees you a seat on the board of directors. Uncle Charles adjusted his reading glasses, looking incredibly intrigued by the glossy brochure in his hands. It sounds remarkably innovative, Connor. And you are certain the FDA approval process is already underway. It is a guaranteed return on investment. Desmond interjected, his voice booming with false authority. Vivian and I have already pledged our absolute financial support to the venture. You know I do not back losing horses, Charles. I stepped fully into the dining room, my crimson suit drawing the light of the crystal chandeliers overhead. That is fascinating, Desmond, I said, my voice slicing through the warm, festive atmosphere like a steel blade. Because according to the certified federal bank records I reviewed yesterday, you do not have $50 to your name, let alone $50,000. The entire dining room froze. The festive hum of conversation died instantly. Aunt Beatrice dropped her silver fork onto her china plate with a loud, clattering ring. Uncle Charles slowly lowered the glossy brochure, turning his head to stare at me. Vivian shot up from her chair so fast it tipped backward and crashed onto the hardwood floor. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. "You are trespassing!" Vivian screamed, her voice shrill and echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "You have absolutely no right to be here, Zuri. You were not invited. You have no power in this house. Desmond, call the police right now. Have her arrested." I did not flinch. I did not break my stride. I walked directly to the center of the dining room where the table was clear of serving platters. I placed the sleek black briefcase flat on the mahogany wood. I pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner. The heavy steel latches snapped open with a loud, echoing click. "I have every right to be here, Vivian," I said, keeping my voice deadly calm. "In fact, I am the only person in this room who possesses any actual power over this property." I reached into the briefcase and pulled out the thick, dark blue leather folder I had secured from Zenith National Commercial Bank. I dropped it onto the table directly in front of Uncle Charles. Desmond's face lost all its color. He recognized the heavy blue leather and the embossed gold seal of Zenith National. He took a stumbling step backward, his hand gripping the back of his dining chair for physical support. "Let us discuss your financial support for Connor's new venture," I continued, turning my gaze to my father. "You took out a second and third mortgage on this exact property to fund his last fraudulent business. You owe Zenith National Bank $4 million in toxic high-interest debt. You have not made a single payment in over 90 days. You are in active catastrophic default." Uncle Charles stared at the blue folder, his eyes wide with shock. "Desmond, is this true?" he demanded, looking at my father. "Are you facing foreclosure?" Desmond opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He was completely paralyzed by the sudden violent destruction of his secrets. "He is not facing foreclosure," Uncle Charles corrected smoothly. "He has already been foreclosed upon. Zenith National Bank classified this mansion as a distressed toxic asset. They were desperate to clear it from their quarterly ledgers." I reached into the folder and extracted the heavy notarized deed of ownership. I held it up, ensuring every aunt, uncle, and cousin sitting at the table could see the blazing red federal stamps and the wet ink signatures. "So I bought the debt," I announced, my voice ringing with absolute finality. "I used the corporate leverage of Vanguard Eco Development to purchase the entire distressed portfolio at a premium. The bank officially transferred the property deed yesterday afternoon." I turned slowly, locking eyes with Vivian, whose face was now completely devoid of blood. "It is not your house anymore, Mom," I said, letting the reality crash down upon her. "I own it. I hold the deed. I am your primary creditor. and I am executing the final eviction right now." A collective gasp swept through the dining room. Aunt Beatrice covered her mouth with her hands, shaking her head in sheer disbelief. The glossy brochures for quantum health tech slipped from Uncle Charles' hands and scattered across the floor like worthless garbage. Vivian began to hyperventilate. She reached out, grabbing the edge of the dining table, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the wood. "Zuri, you cannot do this," she gasped, her chest heaving. "We are your parents. You cannot throw us out into the street on Thanksgiving." "You threw me out on a Tuesday," I replied, my tone completely devoid of any empathy or warmth. "The holiday calendar does not grant you immunity from the consequences of your own financial incompetence." Before the absolute shock of the eviction could fully settle over the room, I reached back into the black briefcase. The eviction was just the first phase of the demolition. I had one final target left to destroy. I pulled out a thick-bound stack of forensic accounting documents. They were heavily highlighted, indexed, and stamped by a certified federal fraud investigator. I walked past the frozen, bewildered faces of my extended family and stopped directly in front of my sister. Imani was staring at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and fierce denial. Connor stood frozen beside her, his charismatic salesman persona completely shattered. He looked like a man sizing up the nearest exit. "Do not listen to her, Imani," Connor stammered, taking a slow step backward toward the archway. "She is faking these documents. She is trying to ruin us because she is jealous. We need to leave." I slammed the forensic file onto the table directly in front of Imani. "Read it," I commanded. "Read the exact trajectory of the $2 million your husband supposedly invested in your wellness spa." Imani's hands trembled as she reached out and opened the cover. Her eyes darted across the highlighted banking ledgers. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the sound of my sister turning the heavy pages. "Apex Holistic Sourcing," I said, reciting the shell company names from memory. "Elevate Consulting Group, fictitious vendors created by Connor Sterling. He routed your parents' money out of the country using encrypted wire transfers. But criminals are inherently lazy, Imani. He did not hide his personal expenses very well." Imani gasped, a sharp, agonizing sound that tore through her throat. She was staring at a specific line item on the third page of the forensic report. $85,000, she whispered, her voice shaking violently. "A wire transfer to a luxury jeweler's in Dubai." I nodded slowly. "The exact same week he told you he was attending a silent meditation retreat in Sedona to find himself," I added, twisting the knife deep into the illusion of her perfect marriage. "Look at the next page, Imani. The lease agreements for the exotic sports cars, the $100,000 casino markers in Macau. He did not invest a single dime into your future. He stole your parents' legacy to fund his own pathetic vanity." Imani slowly raised her head. The flawless, glamorous perception she had worshipped her entire life was lying in shattered pieces on the dining room floor. She looked at Connor. Connor raised his hands in a desperate, placating gesture. "Baby, I can explain everything. It was a misunderstanding with the offshore tax codes. I was trying to shield our assets. You stole from my parents," Imani screamed, her voice cracking with a raw, feral intensity. "You bankrupted my family to buy diamonds in Dubai." Imani lunged. She did not slap him. She did not throw a glass of wine. She physically launched herself across the dining chairs, tackling Connor with the sheer chaotic force of a woman who had just realized her entire existence was a lie. Her perfectly manicured fingernails raked across his face, drawing deep parallel lines of blood down his cheek. Connor shouted in pain, shoving her backward with violent force. He scrambled toward the archway, abandoning his wife, abandoning his fraudulent brochures, and abandoning his desperate pitch for seed capital. He just wanted to escape the room before the police arrived. But he did not make it. Uncle Charles and Cousin David, a towering former college linebacker, stepped squarely into the archway. They blocked the exit with their broad shoulders, their faces hardened with absolute fury. They had just realized this man had been minutes away from draining their retirement accounts. "You are not going anywhere, you pathetic parasite," Uncle Charles growled, shoving Connor hard in the chest and sending him stumbling back into the dining room. "David, pull out your phone. Call the federal authorities. Tell them we have an active embezzler trapped in the dining room. The illusion of the golden child's perfect life was completely annihilated. Imani had collapsed onto the floor, weeping hysterically. Her designer dress torn her hands, clutching the forensic accounting documents as if they were a lifeline. Connor was backed into a corner, bleeding from his face, pleading with Uncle Charles to let him walk out the door. I turned my attention away from the chaos and looked back at the head of the table. Desmond had collapsed into his high-backed mahogany chair. The arrogant Southern gentleman was completely gone. He looked small, withered, and ancient. He stared blankly at the wall, his chest barely rising and falling. His blind favoritism, his desperate need for high society validation, and his bougie pride had cost him his entire legacy. He had lost his wealth, his reputation, and his home in a single devastating hour. Vivian was on her knees beside the table. The pearls around her neck rattled as she dragged herself across the floor toward me. She grabbed the hem of my crimson pantsuit, tears streaming down her ruined makeup. "Zuri, please, Vivian," sobbed, her voice cracking with raw, humiliating desperation. "Please do not do this to us. We are your family. We are blood. Where will we go? We have absolutely nothing left. Please show us some mercy." I looked down at the woman who had locked me out in the freezing cold. I felt absolutely nothing. The dark, locked box inside my chest where I had buried the anger and the trauma of my eviction remained completely silent. I slowly pulled the fabric of my suit out of her grasping, trembling hands. "Like you said 5 years ago, Vivian," I stated, my voice echoing with icy, absolute resolution. "You are just wasting space here. You have 30 days to vacate my property. Do not make me send the sheriffs to physically remove you." I picked up the black biometric briefcase. I turned my back on the weeping ruins of the Wilson family and walked out of the mansion. The cool autumn air hit my face as I stepped outside. I walked down the long cobblestone driveway, leaving the shouting and the sirens far behind me. 4 months later, the suffocating heat of a Georgia summer had finally burned away, giving way to the cool, refreshing breezes of the Atlantic coast. The social hierarchy of Atlanta had moved on with ruthless efficiency. Connor Sterling was currently sitting in a federal holding facility facing a 20-count indictment for wire fraud, money laundering, and grand larceny. His trial was scheduled for the fall, and the federal prosecutors were pushing for a mandatory minimum of 15 years. Desmond, Vivian, and Imani had been forced to vacate the Buckhead mansion precisely 30 days after the Thanksgiving disaster. With their credit completely destroyed and their assets seized by the bankruptcy courts, they had been reduced to renting a cramped, dingy 2-bedroom apartment in a decaying complex on the outskirts of the city perimeter. They spent their days trapped in the suffocating quarters, blaming each other for their collective ruin, entirely forgotten by the high society elite they had sacrificed everything to impress. I stood on the expansive wrap-around balcony of my newly constructed beachfront villa. The massive glass doors were slid wide open, allowing the rhythmic sound of the crashing ocean waves to echo through the vaulted living room. The villa was filled with the warm, brilliant sounds of genuine laughter. Elias Thorne was standing near the outdoor kitchen, expertly grilling fresh seafood, while arguing good-naturedly with Maya, my chief of operations, about the latest architectural renderings for our expansion into the Miami commercial market. Richard Sterling, the private equity billionaire who had partnered with me on the Midtown Eco-Complex, was pouring vintage champagne for a tight circle of my closest friends and loyal contractors. There were no forced smiles. There was no desperate posturing for social status. It was a celebration of genuine, earned victory. I leaned against the glass railing, holding a crystal flute of expensive champagne. I looked out over the vast, endless expanse of the dark blue ocean. The heavy, suffocating weight of my childhood, the endless pursuit of validation from people incapable of giving it, was completely gone. I had taken the raw, agonizing rejection that was meant to break me and forged it into an unstoppable empire. I raised my glass to the crashing waves, taking a slow, savoring sip. I was completely at peace. The ultimate lesson here is that true power never stems from familial approval or inherited wealth. It emerges from unyielding inner strength and the courage to build your own empire from the ashes of deep betrayal. When toxic people attempt to destroy you out of greed and vanity, the absolute best revenge is transforming their malicious actions into the very foundation of your lasting success. You must learn to set firm boundaries, protect your peace, and strictly define your own worth. Have you ever had to cut ties with toxic family members to protect your future? Please subscribe and comment